Your mother never amounted to anything, Aunt Gloria told my children with a cruel smirk on her face. Do not be like her. They came home sobbing uncontrollably. I held them close against my chest. Then I picked up my phone and called my property manager. The tenant at 4521 Maple Gloria Henderson. Her lease is not being renewed. She has 60 days to vacate my property. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic relatives who underestimated your worth. My name is Nicole, and I am 33 years old. The afternoon sun was baking the concrete of my Chicago driveway when the incident that changed my family dynamic forever took place. I was standing on the front porch, wiping my hands on a dish towel, waiting for my 10-year-old son Leo and my 8-year-old daughter Sophie to get out of my Aunt Gloria's car. Gloria had offered to drop them off after a family lunch I could not attend because I was working. I thought she was doing me a favor. I thought I was keeping the fragile family peace intact. But as the heavy doors of her leased luxury SUV swung open, my children did not run up the driveway with the happy smiles I was expecting. They stumbled out onto the pavement, their faces red and streaked with heavy tears. Gloria rolled down the tinted window of her car. She rested her arm on the doorframe, looking at me from behind designer sunglasses she could not actually afford. "Teach your kids some manners, Nicole," she shouted, her voice echoing sharply down my quiet suburban street. "I only told them the truth. They need to know that their mother is a college dropout, a divorcee, and an absolute failure who sells junk online. Do not let them end up like you." Before I could even process the absolute venom in her words, she quickly rolled up the window, gunned the engine of her vehicle, and sped off down the road, leaving my children weeping in the driveway. I did not scream after her departing car. I did not chase her down the street to demand an apology. I dropped the dish towel and dropped to my knees on the hot concrete, gathering Leo and Sophie into my arms. Leo was trying to be brave, wiping his wet eyes with the back of his sleeve, but his voice shook as he asked if it was true that I was a failure. Sophie just buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing loudly that Aunt Gloria said I was poor and embarrassing. The rage that ignited in my chest in that moment was unlike anything I had ever felt in my entire life. For years I had swallowed their endless insults. I had let my parents, Thomas and Diane, treat me like the ultimate black sheep of the household. I had let my younger sister Melanie act like she was superior to me just because she played the family game perfectly. I had tolerated Gloria's endless condescension because I deeply wanted my children to have an extended family. I wanted them to know their grandparents and their aunt. I willingly took the emotional beatings so they would not have to suffer them. But Gloria had just crossed the one immovable line I had drawn in the sand. She targeted my children directly. I gently guided them inside our modest house. The house my family constantly judged for being too small and too ordinary for their elite standards. I made them hot cocoa and sat with them on the living room rug. I calmly explained that success does not look the same for everyone in this world. I told them that being a good person matters far more than the luxury car you drive or the expensive brand of clothes you wear on your back. I spent the next 3 hours carefully undoing the psychological damage my aunt had inflicted during a 10-minute car ride. I read them extra bedtime stories, tucked them in tight under their blankets, and waited patiently until their breathing grew steady and deep in sleep. Only then did I let the furious mother bear energy completely take over my mind. I walked down the hall to my kitchen and brewed a strong cup of black coffee. I did not shed a single tear for myself or my family. Crying was for victims, and I stopped being a victim the day my ex-husband walked out on us 3 years ago. When my marriage ended, my family had treated it like a contagious disease. They isolated me, lectured me endlessly, and told me I was ruining my life beyond repair. Instead of breaking under their heavy judgment, I used that deep isolation to build something they knew absolutely nothing about. They thought I was barely surviving by running a small online shop from my messy garage. They truly believed I was the ultimate pity project of the family tree. I carried my coffee into my home office, turned on my laptop, and bypassed the small online shop interface completely. I logged into the highly secure administrative portal of Horizon Logistics and Properties, a massive e-commerce and real estate holding company that I had secretly built from the ground up over the past half-decade. My family loved to brag about their immense wealth, constantly living far beyond their means, and drowning in credit card debt just to keep up appearances. Gloria was the absolute worst offender of them all. She loved boasting about the stunning four-bedroom house she rented in the upscale Maple District, bragging continuously about the beautiful hardwood floors and the gourmet kitchen to anyone who would listen to her. She had absolutely no idea that I was the faceless corporate landlord she paid her expensive rent to every single month. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Brian, my senior property manager. He answered on the second ring. "Good evening, Nicole. Everything all right, Brian?" I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "The tenant at 4521 Maple. Gloria Henderson. I need you to pull her file right now." I could hear him typing quickly on his computer keyboard. "Got it right here. Her lease is up for renewal next month. We were preparing the standard extension paperwork. Cancel the renewal immediately," I instructed him firmly. "I want you to issue a 60-day notice to vacate her premises. Make sure it is filed strictly under Illinois state law. Have it delivered by certified mail and posted securely on her front door tomorrow morning." "No extensions," Brian asked, clearly sensing the finality in my sharp tone. "No extensions, no exceptions," I replied. "She has exactly 60 days to get off my property." I hung up the phone, took a long, slow sip of my dark, bitter coffee, and looked at the glowing screen of my laptop. Aunt Gloria desperately wanted to show my innocent children what a massive failure looked like. I was about to show her what real power actually meant. 2 days later, the air was thick with the scent of roasted garlic and heavy judgment. It was time for the mandatory Sunday dinner at the home of my parents, Thomas and Diane. Attending these weekly gatherings was the unspoken tax I paid to ensure my children knew their grandparents. I pulled my reliable but aging sedan into their pristine driveway, parking far away from the gleaming imported sports car belonging to my younger sister Melanie and her husband Jamal. I took a deep breath, plastered a neutral expression on my face, and walked through the heavy oak front doors. The atmosphere inside was exactly as stifling as I expected. My father Thomas sat in his leather recliner, swirling a glass of expensive scotch and barely offering a nod in my direction. My mother Diane immediately scrutinized my plain navy sweater, her eyes darting over my lack of designer labels before she turned her attention back to setting the formal dining table. Melanie was lounging on the sofa, scrolling through her phone and complaining about her latest luxury spa treatment. Jamal sat quietly beside her. Jamal was a brilliant financial analyst, a hardworking African-American man who funded Melanie's extravagant lifestyle. Despite his massive success and undeniable intelligence, my parents treated him with a thinly veiled condescension that always made my stomach turn. They loved his money, but never truly respected the man. I respected Jamal immensely, knowing we were both outsiders in this toxic ecosystem. I had just poured myself a glass of ice water when the front door burst open. Aunt Gloria made her grand entrance, and it was a theatrical masterpiece. She was practically hyperventilating, her mascara perfectly smudged to look like she had been weeping for hours. She stormed into the dining room, waving a crisp white piece of paper in the air like a white flag of surrender. She threw herself into one of the velvet dining chairs and began sobbing loudly, demanding that everyone look at the absolute tragedy that had befallen her. My mother dropped her serving spoons and rushed to Gloria's side. Thomas stood up from his recliner, his brow furrowed in sudden concern. Melanie finally looked up from her smartphone. I remained standing perfectly still by the kitchen island, taking a slow sip of my ice water. I knew exactly what that piece of paper was. I had authorized it. "They are throwing me out onto the street," Gloria wailed, slamming her manicured fist against the mahogany table. "That faceless corporate slumlord is ruining my entire life. I received a notice to vacate this morning. 60 days. They are giving me 60 days to leave my beautiful home. The hardwood floors, the gourmet kitchen, the neighborhood I belong in. They are ripping it all away from me for absolutely no reason. I have been a perfect tenant. I maintained my blank expression, hiding the intense satisfaction boiling inside my chest. A perfect tenant did not destroy original woodwork, miss rent payments, and terrorize the property management staff. Horizon Logistics and Properties had kept meticulous records of her lease violations. I had simply turned a blind eye to them until she decided to target my children. Diane wrapped an arm around Gloria's shaking shoulders, cooing words of comfort. "It is an absolute outrage," my mother declared. "These massive real estate companies have zero morals. They just want to kick good people out to raise the rent." "Do not worry, Gloria. We will figure this out. We are a family and we take care of our own." Then, as smoothly as a predator locking onto its favorite prey, my mother turned her head and glared directly at me. Her eyes narrowed with unwarranted hostility. She needed an outlet for her frustration, and I was the designated punching bag. "See what your aunt is going through." Diane snapped, her voice echoing sharply against the dining room walls. "If you had not ruined your marriage, you would have a husband right now to help loan her some money. You could have been useful to this family. But instead you are too busy scraping by selling junk online and living in that tiny house of yours. You cannot even offer her a place to stay because you threw your life away." The sheer absurdity of her statement hung heavy in the air. My mother was genuinely blaming my 3-year-old divorce for my aunt's current housing crisis. Thomas nodded in agreement, taking another sip of his scotch, as if my mother had just stated a profound universal truth. Melanie smirked from the sofa, clearly enjoying the fact that the negative attention was solely focused on me. I opened my mouth to respond, preparing to deliver a calm but firm boundary, but someone else beat me to it. Jamal leaned forward, his deep voice cutting through the toxic noise of the room. He knit his brow, looking at my mother with pure, unadulterated confusion. "Diane, how is Nicole's divorce from 3 years ago relevant to Gloria's landlord taking their property back?" The room went dead silent. Nobody ever questioned Diane. Nobody ever defended me. Jamal looked around the room, his analytical mind completely rejecting the ridiculous leap of logic my mother had just made. He pointed to the eviction notice on the table. "A property management company decided not to renew a lease. That is a standard real estate transaction. Blaming Nicole for not having a husband to bail Gloria out is completely irrational." Melanie's face flushed a deep, angry red. She immediately grabbed Jamal's forearm, her acrylic nails digging into his sleeve. "Do not get involved, Jamal," she hissed sharply, her voice frantic with the need to protect the established family hierarchy. "You do not understand how our family supports each other. Nicole knows she has been a burden since she dropped out of college. Just stay out of family business." Jamal pulled his arm away from Melanie's grip, his expression hardening into quiet disgust. He looked at me across the room, and in that brief second of eye contact, a silent alliance was forged between us. He saw exactly how twisted their dynamic was, and he was no longer willing to pretend it was normal. Gloria sobbed louder, desperate to regain the spotlight from our brief moment of rebellion. "Please let us not fight about Nicole's endless failures right now. I am the one losing my home. I need at least $30,000 to secure a luxury condo downtown before the 60 days are up. I cannot be seen moving into some cheap apartment complex on the wrong side of the city. It would completely destroy my reputation." I set my water glass down on the granite counter with a soft click. The trap was beginning to take shape, and they were walking right into it blindly. The audacity of my aunt to demand such an exorbitant amount of money while openly insulting me was staggering. My parents immediately began discussing which accounts they could pull funds from, completely oblivious to the fact that their golden lifestyle was built on a crumbling foundation of debt. Jamal watched them scheme, his sharp eyes missing nothing, taking mental notes of every financial lie they were spinning. He knew their credit was maxed out because he was the one who quietly paid their overdue balances every single month to keep Melanie happy. The sheer entitlement radiating from Gloria was sickening, but I refused to let it break my composure. I watched my family rally around the very woman who had verbally abused my innocent children just 2 days prior. They were utterly predictable in their cruelty, always protecting the absolute worst people while stepping on anyone who actually showed them genuine kindness. My silence was not a surrender, it was a calculated observation. I was simply waiting for the perfect moment to pull the rug out from under all of them. The dinner table remained a battlefield of misplaced priorities and toxic family politics. My father Thomas finally stood up from his leather recliner, abandoning his glass of scotch on the small side table. He marched into the dining room with his chest puffed out and slammed his fist down hard on the mahogany table, making the fine china rattle and the silverware clink against the plates. "Enough of this crying, Gloria," he barked, though his tone was meant to be comforting and protective. "We are not going to let some faceless real estate conglomerate destroy our family name. If word gets out that my sister-in-law was evicted and forced into a cheap apartment complex, our social standing in this community will be completely ruined. The country club members would gossip about us for months on end. We must protect our reputation at all costs." My mother, Diane, nodded vigorously, wiping a fake tear from her eye as she stood firmly by his side. Thomas then outlined his grand rescue mission to the room. The family would pool their financial resources together immediately. They would not just rent a new place for Gloria to live. They would buy a luxury condominium downtown, cash up front, to prove to everyone in their elite social circle that they were untouchable. It was a laughable fantasy, considering my parents were secretly drowning in six-figure debt, propped up entirely by the quiet bailout checks Jamal provided to them every single month. Thomas began assigning financial burdens like a general deploying troops to the front lines. He looked at Jamal first casually, expecting thousands of dollars from his son-in-law without even bothering to ask politely. Then his gaze snapped directly to me. I was still standing by the kitchen island, my posture relaxed, but my senses on high alert. "Nicole," my father commanded, pointing a rigid accusatory finger in my direction. "You live a completely bare-bones lifestyle. You drive a beat-up sedan, and you never spend money on anything nice for yourself. You just sit in your messy garage packing boxes for your little online shop all day long. You must have a decent amount of cash tucked away since you do not have any real expenses or a social life to maintain. We need $30,000 from you by the end of the week. Empty out your savings accounts. Consider it your way of finally paying this family back for all the embarrassment your divorce caused us 3 years ago." Gloria wiped her smudged mascara with a silk napkin and chimed in, her voice dripping with absolute entitlement. "Exactly, Nicole. You do not need the money anyway. It is the least you can do to pay tribute to the elders of this family. I deserve a beautiful home." The sheer audacity of their demand hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They honestly expected me to hand over $30,000 in hard-earned cash to fund a luxury lifestyle for a woman who had gleefully tormented my children just 48 hours prior. I set my glass of ice water down on the granite counter. The glass clinked sharply, cutting through the tense silence of the room. I looked directly into Gloria's tear-stained eyes, refusing to break eye contact, then slowly shifted my gaze to my father. "No," I said, my voice dangerously calm and perfectly steady. "I am not giving a single dime to a woman who made my children cry." The room erupted into immediate, predictable chaos. Diane gasped loudly, clutching her pearl necklace, as if I had just committed a violent crime right in her pristine kitchen. Gloria let out a theatrical wail, burying her face in her hands and crying loudly about how disrespectful and ungrateful the younger generation had become. Thomas stepped forward, his face turning a deep, angry shade of purple. "Excuse me," he roared, his voice booming. "You do not get to dictate terms in this house. You will do exactly as you are told. Gloria was just trying to give your kids some tough love so they do not end up as failures like you." Melanie uncrossed her legs on the sofa and let out a loud, mocking laugh that cut through our father's shouting. "Oh, please," Melanie scoffed, tossing her styled hair over her shoulder and glaring at me with disdain. Stop trying to act like some fierce protective mother. We all know the real truth. You probably do not even have $3,000 to your name. You are just using Leo and Sophie as a convenient excuse because you are completely broke. Your internet hustle is a joke, Nicole. Just admit you are a miserable failure and stop trying to make Aunt Gloria look like the bad guy here. Jamal stared at his wife, his jaw clenched tight. He looked disgusted by the venom pouring out of Melanie's mouth, his analytical mind processing the deep sickness of this family dynamic. I did not need Jamal or anyone else to fight my battles today. I had heard enough. I did not scream back at them. I did not justify my finances or explain the massive corporate empire I had successfully built. I turned around, grabbed my trench coat from the hall closet, and slipped it over my shoulders. You can all drown in your own delusions, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. Good luck buying that luxury condo. I opened the heavy oak front door and walked out into the cool evening air. Behind me, the house exploded into an uproar of shouting complaints and bitter insults. I walked down the driveway to my old sedan unbothered by their noise. Let them scramble. Let them panic. Let them drain whatever imaginary funds they thought they had. The clock was ticking down on Gloria's 60-day notice, and nothing they screamed at me was going to stop the eviction I had personally set in motion. I woke up very early today, packed healthy lunches for Leo and Sophie, and dropped them off at their elementary school. I was sitting at my desk when my phone vibrated. I answered it, hearing the panicked voice of Mrs. Higgins, the front desk receptionist. Nicole, please come to the school right away, Mrs. Higgins whispered, her voice trembling. Your Aunt Gloria and your sister Melanie are here in the front office. They are demanding that we release Leo and Sophie into their custody immediately. My blood ran ice cold. What do you mean they are demanding custody? I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. They are not on the approved pickup list. I know, Mrs. Higgins replied, but they are in the lobby screaming. Your aunt is loudly telling other parents and the school principal that you are financially and mentally unstable. She claims you had a severe psychological breakdown last night and that they are stepping in to rescue the children from a dangerous environment. Gloria was furious about my refusal to hand over $30,000. Lock the doors, I ordered Mrs. Higgins. Do not let them near my kids. I am leaving right now. I grabbed my car keys and lockbox containing my legal documents. This was the classic playbook of toxic families. They were trying to paint me as an unfit mother to punish me for saying no to their financial extortion. I slammed my car into a parking spot and sprinted toward the main entrance. As soon as I pushed through the heavy glass doors into the main office, the chaotic scene unfolded exactly as described. Gloria was performing a theatrical masterpiece of fake distress. She has completely lost her mind, Gloria wailed to the principal. We just want to take our precious niece and nephew somewhere safe until their mother gets psychiatric help. I marched directly into the center of the room, slamming my heavy lockbox down onto the reception counter with a deafening thud. Nobody is taking my innocent children anywhere. I announced, my voice cutting through Gloria's fake sobbing like a razor blade. The principal looked incredibly relieved to see me. Gloria immediately bristled, her fake tears vanishing in a split second. She pointed an accusatory finger at me. There she is, Gloria declared to the room. Look at her. She is unhinged. We are taking the kids, Nicole. You cannot even afford to feed them properly. I ignored her completely and turned my attention straight to the principal. I snapped open my lockbox and pulled out a stack of legal papers stamped by the state family court. Here is my sole custody documentation, I said clearly. My ex-husband surrendered his rights 3 years ago. Furthermore, here is my updated emergency contact list. You will see that Gloria Henderson and Melanie are explicitly forbidden from picking up my children. They have no legal rights and absolutely no business being on this campus. Melanie scoffed loudly. You are acting crazy, Nicole. We are your family. We have every right to check on our nephew and niece when their mother is acting like a lunatic. I turned to face my sister, stepping directly into her personal space. If you do not leave this building in exactly 10 seconds, I am having the campus police officer arrest you both for causing a public disturbance. Gloria scoffed, trying to maintain her air of superiority. You would not dare involve the police. Think of the family scandal. I pulled my cell phone from my pocket and dialed 911. 1098 I counted down, staring dead into Gloria's eyes. Realizing I was not bluffing in the slightest, Gloria grabbed Melanie's arm. Fine! Gloria hissed, her face contorted with pure rage. Come on, Melanie. We are leaving. She is clearly too far gone to reason with. They turned on their heels and marched out the glass doors. I thanked the principal and Mrs. Higgins for their vigilance. After confirming my children were safe and completely unaware of the drama, I walked out to the parking lot to finish this conversation. Gloria and Melanie were standing by Melanie's sports car. They wanted the last word. I strode across the asphalt and backed Gloria directly against the passenger door, my physical proximity forcing her to drop her haughty posture. Let me make this crystal clear, I said, keeping my voice low and lethal. If you ever come near my children again, or if you ever try to weaponize my kids to punish me, I will have you arrested for trespassing. I will file a restraining order so fast it will make your head spin. My children are completely off limits to you. Gloria simply rolled her eyes, recovering her fake bravado. She let out a loud, mocking laugh that scraped against my ears. She looked me up and down, taking in my plain clothes and my lack of designer accessories. You are so pathetic, Nicole. Gloria scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. Just go ahead and call the police. Make a fool of yourself. You are a nobody. You have no money, you have no status, and you have absolutely no power in this family or in this city. You are just a broke, miserable failure trying to act tough. I stared at her arrogant face. She truly believed her own delusions. She believed her leased car and her rented house made her royalty. She had absolutely no idea that the eviction notice sitting on her dining room table had my invisible signature at the bottom of it. You have no power, she repeated, sliding into the passenger seat. I stepped back, allowing Melanie to close the door. I watched them drive away, a cold, calculated smile finally breaking across my face. She thought I was powerless. She had no idea the 60-day countdown had already begun. I did not drive back to my home office after watching my aunt and sister speed out of the elementary school parking lot. Instead, I merged onto the highway and headed straight to downtown Chicago to meet with my corporate attorney. I sat in his high-rise office and laid out exactly what had transpired that morning. I instructed him to draft an immediate cease and desist order against Gloria Henderson and Melanie. The document was mercilessly clear. It outlined their attempt to unlawfully remove my children from school grounds and explicitly warned that any further contact or harassment would result in an immediate restraining order and criminal charges. I paid the premium fee to have it served by a private process server that very same afternoon. My children were my absolute universe, and I was building an impenetrable legal fortress around them. I would never let them harm Leo and Sophie again. Let my family spin their wild tales. Their empty words meant absolutely nothing to me as long as a massive legal wall stood between their toxic behavior and my kids. While I was actively fortifying my boundaries, an entirely different revelation was unfolding across the city. Jamal had retreated to his home office after the chaotic Sunday dinner. He was a senior financial analyst for a major investment firm, a man whose entire career was built on identifying patterns and following the money trail. His analytical brain was currently fixated on the eviction notice Gloria had dramatically slammed onto the dining room table 2 nights prior. Before leaving my parents' house, Jamal had quietly snapped a photo of the document with his smartphone. He pulled up the image on his monitor, now zooming in on the crisp text. He stared closely at the highly professional logo printed at the top of the page. The letterhead belonged to Horizon Logistics and Properties LLC. Jamal leaned back in his ergonomic chair, staring at the corporate name. It scratched at the back of his mind. He closed his eyes, sorting through the countless corporate entities he analyzed every single week. Then it hit him. It was not from a work portfolio. The memory transported him back 6 months ago to a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Melanie had forced him to drop off some hand-me-down winter coats at my house, claiming I was too poor to buy new ones for Leo and Sophie. While waiting on my front porch, Jamal had noticed a stack of misdelivered mail resting on the small table by my door. One large envelope bore an official state seal. He had glanced at the addressee. Horizon Logistics and Properties, LLC. At the time, he assumed I was receiving junk mail meant for a previous tenant. But seeing that exact same corporate entity, listed as the owner of Aunt Gloria's luxury rental house, triggered an immediate alarm bell in his analytical mind. Jamal sat up straight, his fingers flying across his mechanical keyboard. He logged into his firm's highly secure financial database, a proprietary tool used for vetting multi-million-dollar acquisitions. He typed Horizon Logistics and Properties, LLC, into the search bar and hit enter. The loading icon spun before populating a comprehensive corporate profile. Jamal scanned the screen, his eyes widening with every line of data he absorbed. He looked at the property portfolio first. Horizon owned 15 commercial warehouses across the Midwest, holding lucrative supply chain contracts with massive retail brands. Then he clicked on the residential tab. The company held titles to over 24 premium properties in the greater Chicago area, including the highly coveted Maple Street residence currently occupied by Gloria. The estimated valuation of the holding company was staggering. Jamal felt his heart pounding against his ribs. He scrolled down to the executive summary to find the principal owner. The name glared back at him in bold black text. My name. The database confirmed I was the sole founder and chief executive officer of the entire operation. Jamal let out a low, breathless laugh, dragging his hands down his face. He sat alone in his office, fully absorbing the monumental truth of what he was looking at. His wife Melanie and her entire arrogant family had spent the last 5 years relentlessly mocking a woman they believed was a pathetic, broke online seller. They had demanded $30,000 from her like she was a peasant. They had treated her with the same toxic condescension they often directed at him. Yet hiding in plain sight, wearing plain clothes and driving an old sedan, I was a quiet millionaire. I was the silent owner of the very roof over Gloria's head. Jamal leaned closer to the monitor, reading through the incorporation dates. He realized I had started building this empire right after my divorce, channeling all my pain into a ruthless, highly profitable business strategy. While my parents were sinking into massive debt to buy designer clothes, I was acquiring commercial real estate. While Gloria was throwing away thousands of dollars a month on rent to maintain her fake upper-class image, she was literally paying my mortgage and padding my corporate accounts. The sheer brilliance of my long game left Jamal utterly speechless. He realized I had masterfully outsmarted every single one of them. He heard the sharp click of Melanie's heels echoing in the hallway outside his office door. She was loudly complaining on the phone to her mother about how disrespectful I had been at the elementary school, whining about how I dared to threaten them with the police. Jamal quickly closed the financial database tab. A profound sense of disgust washed over him as he listened to his wife's entitled complaining. He realized he was married into a family of absolute clowns dancing on the edge of a cliff. They had poked a sleeping bear, and now that bear was wide awake. Jamal pulled out his phone, opened a blank text message, and typed my name into the recipient box. I stared at the glowing screen of my phone as a new text message appeared. It was from Jamal. The message was brief and highly unusual. We need to talk alone, tomorrow at 10 in the morning. Meet me at the Roasted Bean on 4th Street. Do not tell Melanie. I read the words twice, my mind racing through the possibilities. Jamal and I had always maintained a quiet, mutual respect, but we never communicated outside of mandatory family gatherings. If he was reaching out secretly, something major had shifted. I typed a simple confirmation and locked my phone. The next morning, I walked into the dimly lit coffee shop located safely away from the upscale suburbs my family frequented. The air smelled of roasted espresso and rain. I spotted Jamal sitting in a secluded corner booth nursing a black coffee. He wore a sharp-tailored suit looking every bit the high-powered financial analyst he was, but the exhaustion etched into his features was undeniable. I slid into the leather booth across from him, keeping my posture guarded but attentive. Jamal did not offer any small talk. He reached into his leather briefcase, pulled out a single sheet of paper, and slid it face down across the wooden table. I looked at his serious expression, then slowly reached out and flipped the paper over. It was a printed snapshot of the corporate profile for Horizon Logistics and Properties. My name was highlighted in yellow ink right next to the Chief Executive Officer title. A separate section highlighting the residential assets listed the exact address of Gloria's leased home. You own a multi-million-dollar e-commerce supply chain, Nicole. Jamal said, his voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. You own Aunt Gloria's house. You are the faceless corporate landlord she has been cursing all week. I did not flinch. I did not try to deny it. I maintained steady eye contact with him, calculating my next move. I folded my hands on the table. Are you going to tell them? I asked calmly. Jamal let out a sharp, bitter laugh and shook his head. Tell them, Nicole. I am sitting here because I want to watch them burn. That caught my attention. The polished, ever-patient brother-in-law was finally showing the deep resentment he had been carrying for years. I leaned forward, giving him the floor. He took a deep breath, his broad shoulders tensing as he finally voiced the heavy burden he had been shouldering alone. I am completely exhausted, Nicole. Jamal confessed, his voice thick with frustration. I am tired of the financial hypocrisy and the endless covert racism in that house. They constantly praise Melanie to her face for marrying well, but the moment they think I am out of earshot, they talk down to me. They make subtle, degrading comments about my background. They act like my success is some bizarre anomaly because I am a black man, yet they have absolutely no problem treating me like their personal, automated teller machine. I listened intently, my heart aching for the disrespect he was forced to endure. I knew my parents were deeply prejudiced, hiding their toxic views behind country club memberships and fake smiles. Your parents are drowning in debt, Jamal revealed, dropping a massive truth bomb onto the table. Thomas and Diane owe over $100,000 across multiple credit cards. Gloria is entirely broke. Melanie spends money faster than I can track it. For the last 2 years, I have been secretly paying off your parents' mortgages and clearing their credit balances just to keep the peace in my marriage. They look down on me, yet they literally survive off my paycheck. And now, watching them treat you like garbage, watching them demand $30,000 from a woman they think is poor, it makes me sick to my stomach. We sat in the quiet corner of the coffee shop, two outsiders bound together by the same toxic family. They hate you because you do not follow their script, Jamal said softly. And they resent me because my financial success highlights their own massive failures. How long have you known about the eviction? I issued the notice the very same night Gloria made my children cry in my driveway, I answered honestly. I gave her exactly 60 days to vacate. I am done playing the punching bag for a family that values fake wealth over real loyalty. Jamal smiled, a genuine expression of profound respect. Then you need to know what they are planning next, he warned, leaning closer across the table. Gloria is not looking for a new apartment. She is planning a massive house rescue fundraiser dinner. She used a high-interest credit card to book a ballroom at a 5-star restaurant downtown for next weekend. I frowned, trying to process the absolute delusion of her plan. A fundraiser. For what? To publicly shame you. Jamal explained clearly. She is inviting all of their wealthy high society friends. She intends to play the tragic victim being thrown out onto the streets right before the holidays. The entire goal of the evening is to put you on a public stage, humiliate you in front of dozens of influential people, and aggressively pressure you into handing over your savings to save her from homelessness. Diane and Thomas are completely on board. They want to break your boundaries in front of an audience so you have no choice but to comply and hand over your money. The sheer manipulation of their strategy was breathtaking. They wanted to use peer pressure and public humiliation to extort me. They thought my desire to avoid a public scene would override my desire to protect my finances. They were playing checkers, completely unaware that I had already won the chess match. I felt a cold, sharp smile spread across my face. I looked at Jamal, seeing the fierce intelligence and shared determination in his eyes. "Let them do it," I said, my voice completely devoid of fear. "Let them book the expensive ballroom. Let them invite every single snobby friend they have. Let them set the stage and gather the audience." Jamal raised an eyebrow, a knowing grin matching mine. "You are going to attend the dinner?" "Oh, I would not miss it for the world," I replied, leaning back in the leather booth. "They want to put me on a stage, Jamal, so I am going to give them a performance they will never forget. I want you to sit back, enjoy your dinner, and watch the show. We are going to let them dig their own graves in front of everyone they are trying to impress." Before we parted ways, Jamal shared a few more details about the guest list. Gloria had invited local politicians, members of the Homeowners Association, and several prominent business owners that my father constantly tried to impress. She was banking on the fact that these people loved a charitable cause, especially one that made them look like saviors to a distressed socialite. She planned to frame me as the cold-hearted relative who refused to help her own blood, spinning a narrative where she was the innocent martyr. I thanked Jamal for his courage in stepping forward. I knew exposing his own wife and her family was a massive risk, but his integrity was stronger than his desire to keep a toxic peace. He stood up from the booth, buttoning his suit jacket. "I will see you at the dinner, Nicole. Wear something nice." "I will wear exactly what they expect me to wear," I replied with a confident smirk. "The broke online seller is going to make a grand appearance." As Jamal walked out of the coffee shop, I pulled out my phone and dialed my property manager once again. The wheels were officially in motion. My aunt wanted a fundraiser, and I was going to make sure she got exactly what she bargained for. Over the next few days, Gloria went into an absolute frenzy of delusional spending. Through the quiet updates Jamal provided me, I learned exactly how far my aunt was willing to go to maintain her fabricated reality. Instead of packing her belongings or looking for a reasonably priced apartment, Gloria marched straight into the Wellington, the most exclusive five-star restaurant in the city. She booked their grand ballroom for a Saturday night. She did not use a debit card or cash. She slapped down a high-interest credit card that was already teetering on the edge of its maximum limit. She ordered towering centerpieces of imported white orchids, an open bar serving premium champagne, and a customized menu featuring filet mignon and butter-poached lobster tail. She was utterly convinced that if she threw a lavish enough party, her wealthy country club friends would simply open their designer checkbooks and donate enough cash to buy her a new luxury house outright. She viewed her impending eviction not as a financial crisis, but as a golden opportunity to play the tragic, glamorous martyr in front of the local elite. Gloria spent her afternoons driving her leased luxury SUV from boutique to boutique, purchasing a brand new evening gown and scheduling emergency appointments at high-end salons. She genuinely believed her affluent social circle cared deeply about her personal well-being. She failed to realize that those people only tolerated her because she threw good parties and gossiped with them over expensive wine. In her mind, she was the undisputed queen of the suburbs who was currently being victimized by a cruel, faceless corporate landlord. She printed hundreds of elegant gold-embossed invitations and mailed them out to local politicians, business owners, and socialites. The invitations read like a dramatic plea for high society charity, requesting their presence at a benefit dinner to rescue a prominent community member from a sudden housing tragedy. Meanwhile, inside the walls of Jamal and Melanie's home, the tension was reaching a dangerous boiling point. Jamal sat at his sleek glass dining table, reviewing the family's terrifying financial statements. He watched as Melanie paced back and forth across the room, enthusiastically chatting on her phone with Gloria about the color scheme for the ballroom decorations. Melanie was completely swept up in the excitement of the upcoming high society event, actively ignoring the massive financial disaster unfolding right in front of them. When Melanie finally ended the call, Jamal set his pen down and looked at his wife with sheer disbelief. "Melanie," Jamal said, his deep voice thick with absolute frustration. You cannot possibly think this is a good idea. Your aunt is facing a 60-day eviction notice because she cannot afford her rent, and she has actively destroyed property. Instead of finding a cheaper place to live, she just maxed out another credit card to book a 5-star restaurant ballroom. She is spending money she absolutely does not have. This is complete financial suicide. Melanie stopped pacing and glared at her husband, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She let out a sharp, condescending scoff that echoed through their pristine living room. "You are being completely dramatic, Jamal," she snapped, her voice dripping with unwarranted arrogance. "Aunt Gloria has an image to maintain. She cannot just disappear into some cheap, run-down apartment complex on the edge of town. Her friends expect a certain level of class. You wouldn't understand our family's standards, Jamal. You just do not get how high society works." The casual insult hung heavily in the air. Melanie had just weaponized her fake family standards to insult her African-American husband, the very man who quietly funded her entire extravagant lifestyle. Jamal stared at the woman he married, realizing just how deeply brainwashed she was by her parents and her aunt. She genuinely believed their family possessed some inherent superiority, completely ignoring the fact that their entire existence was funded by mounting debt and his hard-earned paycheck. Jamal did not raise his voice. He did not argue with her twisted logic. He simply nodded slowly, his analytical mind filing away her toxic words. He realized that saving this family from themselves was a completely pointless endeavor. They were actively choosing to drive off a cliff, and he was finally ready to let go of the steering wheel completely. While Gloria planned her extravagant rescue mission, and Melanie blindly defended her, I remained in my home office orchestrating my own strategy. I did not max out any credit cards. I did not buy a new dress to impress anyone. I continued to wear my plain clothes and drive my older car, dropping Leo and Sophie off at school every morning and packing orders for my supply chain network every afternoon. I operated in absolute silence, knowing that true power never needs to scream for attention. I called Brian to gather the legal documents I needed. I pulled the original property deed for the Maple Street house, ensuring the Horizon Logistics and Properties corporate seal was clearly visible on the heavy paper. I printed out the comprehensive ledger of Gloria's consistently late rent payments and the detailed photographs my maintenance team had taken of the unauthorized damages she had caused to the original hardwood floors. My parents, Thomas and Diane, were equally consumed by the upcoming fundraiser. They spent their entire week calling their own friends, pressuring them to attend the dinner and bring their checkbooks. They viewed this event as a massive opportunity to prove how loved and respected their family was in the community. They were all completely intoxicated by their own fabricated reality, convinced that a single glamorous evening would magically solve all of Gloria's financial problems. They had absolutely no idea that I was quietly waiting in the shadows, holding the very documents that would shatter their entire world into a million pieces. The sheer arrogance required to throw a luxury party while facing a legal eviction was something only my family could muster. They were so blinded by their obsession with status that they never once stopped to question who was actually pulling the strings. They never questioned how the faceless landlord operated or why the eviction notice was delivered so swiftly after the incident at my driveway. They simply assumed the world was treating them unfairly. They believed their own lies so deeply that they could no longer recognize the truth staring them right in the face. I looked at the thick manila folder resting on my desk. It contained every piece of evidence I needed to dismantle their fake empire. My aunt wanted a public spectacle. She wanted a stage, an audience, and a microphone. I was more than happy to let her have it. I knew that the higher she climbed onto her pedestal of lies, the harder the fall would be when I finally revealed the truth. The shrill pitch of Diane's voice vibrated through the phone speaker with enough force to make me hold the device an inch away from my ear. "You are unbelievable, Nicole. Absolutely unbelievable. I am facing the worst crisis of my entire life, and you are sitting there hoarding your little paycheck while I am about to be thrown out on the street." I stared out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my downtown office, watching the city traffic crawl far below. I kept my face perfectly neutral. What crisis? Diane, you mean the eviction notice you received from your landlord? Do not play stupid with me, Diane snapped. You know exactly what is happening. That faceless, greedy corporate holding company bought my building and is kicking me out for absolutely no reason. They refuse to renew my lease. They are demanding thousands in imaginary damages. Mom had to put her anniversary cruise on hold just to help me pay for lawyers. The least you can do is contribute to my relocation fund. In the background, I could hear the distinct, sharp voice of our mother. Tell her we are changing the will, Diane. Tell her I am done playing games with her selfish attitude. Diane did not miss a beat. You heard her, Nicole. If you do not come to this dinner tonight and donate to my fund, you are dead to this family. You will be cut out forever. Do not expect to come crawling back for Thanksgiving. Do not expect a dime when Mom and Dad pass away. You either show up at the Sterling tonight at 8 with a substantial contribution, or you lose us permanently. The ultimatum hung in the air. This was their classic playbook. Create a manufactured crisis driven entirely by Diane's terrible life choices, demand that I empty my savings to fix it, and use the threat of excommunication as the ultimate weapon. For 30 years, that threat had worked. It had kept me in line, kept me writing checks, kept me apologizing for simply existing. But they had severely miscalculated this time. They were threatening to cut me out of a will that consisted mostly of debt in exchange for saving Diane from an eviction that I had personally ordered. I let my voice tremble slightly, pitching it up just enough to sound panicked. I manufactured a slight sniffle. Fine, I said softly, injecting just the right amount of defeat into my tone. I will be there. I will bring what I have. A heavy, satisfied sigh came through the receiver. Diane had won, or so she thought. I knew you would finally see reason, she said, her tone instantly pivoting from hysterical victim to smug victor. We booked the private dining room at the Sterling. Make sure it is a cashier's check, Nicole. I do not have time to wait for personal checks to clear, and please dress appropriately for once. Do not embarrass us by wearing those cheap thrift store clothes you always insist on wearing. I ended the call without another word. The moment the screen went black, the fake tremor in my hands vanished. The engineered panic evaporated, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. I walked over to my heavy mahogany desk and pressed the speed dial button for my lead property manager and personal attorney. Brian answered on the first ring. Tell me she took the bait? He said, his voice laced with anticipation. She swallowed it whole, I replied, a genuine smile finally breaking across my face. She threatened to disown me if I do not show up tonight to bail her out of her housing crisis. Mom was right there in the background cheering her on. Brian let out a low whistle. They really have no limits, do they? Extorting the scapegoat to pay for the golden child's mistakes. What is the play here, Nicole? The play is complete and total exposure, I said, my voice dropping to a serious, commanding register. Brian, I need you to go to the company vault right now. Get the original deed to the Maplewood property. Print out the comprehensive ledger of Diane's missed rent payments for the last 14 months, and most importantly, print high-resolution copies of the photos from the last property inspection. You mean the photos of the unauthorized damages she caused to the property? Brian asked, already typing rapidly on his keyboard. Exactly, I confirmed. Bring the photos of the load-bearing wall she hired some unlicensed contractor to knock down because she wanted an open-concept living room in a house she did not own. Bring the invoices for the vintage mahogany hardwood floors her neglected dogs completely ruined. Bring the quotes for the extensive water damage she caused by trying to install a luxury soaking tub without pulling a single city permit. I have the entire file ready, Brian said. I also have the finalized eviction notice stamped by the Superior Court judge from this morning. Her appeals were officially denied. She has exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises before the sheriff physically removes her. Perfect. Meet me at the Sterling at 8 o'clock sharp, I instructed. Wait in the lobby until I text you. They booked the private dining room. They think they are setting up a private execution where they can bully me into emptying my bank account away from prying eyes. They are about to find out the executioner is already in the room, Brian noted. I will see you at 8. I hung up the phone and walked to the private suite attached to my office. Diane had commanded me not to wear my cheap thrift store clothes. She still believed I was the struggling junior designer she had mocked 5 years ago. She had no idea that while she was busy maxing out credit cards to maintain the illusion of wealth, I had built a real estate investment firm that effectively owned half the commercial blocks in our city. She had no idea that the faceless corporate holding company she had been cursing for months was entirely owned by the sister she constantly belittled. I opened my closet and selected a tailored midnight blue designer suit that cost more than Diane's car. I slipped on a pair of stiletto heels that announced every step with absolute authority. I fastened a subtle but undeniably authentic diamond necklace around my throat. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. There was no trace of the frightened, eager-to-please daughter they had conditioned me to be. That girl was gone, buried under years of their relentless emotional abuse. As I rode the private elevator down to the parking garage, I thought about the sheer audacity of my family's demands. Diane had lived rent-free in that luxury property for over a year, ignoring notices, dodging property managers, and treating the house like her own personal playground. When the holding company finally moved to evict her, she ran crying to our parents, spinning a wild tale of corporate greed and unfair targeting. And our parents, as always, demanded that I foot the bill to fix her mess. I stepped into my sleek imported luxury sedan, the leather seats cool against my back. The drive to the Sterling took exactly 20 minutes. Every red light, every turn built the anticipation in my chest. They wanted a show. They wanted to force me into submission. They wanted me to hand over my hard-earned money to fund Diane's delusions of grandeur. I pulled up to the valet stand at the Sterling, handed over my keys, and walked through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. I spotted Brian standing near the host stand, clutching a thick, leather-bound folder that contained the absolute destruction of my family's fabricated reality. I gave him a subtle nod, signaling him to wait, and followed the hostess toward the private dining room. The heavy oak doors were closed. From the other side, I could hear my mother's loud, boastful laughter and Diane's unmistakable voice complaining about the service. I paused for one brief second, taking a slow, deep breath. I pushed the brass handle and walked into the room, ready to burn their perfectly constructed illusions to the ground. I expected to find a single round table set for 4, perhaps tucked away in a quiet corner where my parents could quietly badger me into submission. Instead, I stepped into a sprawling banquet hall, bathed in the warm, golden glow of crystal chandeliers. The private dining room at the Sterling was not reserved for an intimate family intervention. It was reserved for a gala of grift. Dozens of circular tables filled the space, draped in crisp white linen and adorned with towering floral centerpieces that easily cost $500 apiece. Seated around these tables were at least 60 of my parents' closest associates. I recognized the faces immediately. There were members of my mother's exclusive country club real estate brokers. My father played golf with prominent figures from their church and a collection of wealthy socialites who thrived on local gossip. My mother Gloria had not just set a trap for me, she had organized a full-scale fundraising event. I remained near the heavy oak doors, standing in the shadows of the coat-check alcove. No one noticed my arrival because all eyes were fixed on the small, elevated stage at the front of the room. The ambient chatter died down as the house lights dimmed. A single spotlight illuminated the stage. My mother stepped up to a polished silver microphone, adjusting it with practiced grace. She wore a stunning emerald green evening gown and a Rolex watch that sparkled under the stage lights, a glaring contradiction to the narrative of financial ruin she was about to spin. "Thank you all so much for being here tonight," Gloria began, her voice echoing softly through the room. She placed a hand over her heart, her face contorting into a mask of profound sorrow. "We invited our truest friends, our chosen family, because we are facing an unimaginable crisis." A collective hush fell over the room. At the head table, seated directly in the spotlight's spillover, sat my sister Diane. She was draped in a tasteful subdued cashmere wrap, looking down at her empty dessert plate with an expression of manufactured misery. She looked like a wounded gazelle, perfectly styled to elicit maximum pity. As many of you know, my sweet Diane has always been a beacon of light in this community. Gloria continued, her voice taking on a trembling theatrical quality. She has dedicated her life to helping others, always giving, always nurturing. For the past year, she has lived quietly in a modest rental home, treating the property with the utmost respect. She was the perfect tenant. She planted flowers in the garden. She kept the house immaculate. She turned a simple house into a sanctuary. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. The sanctuary Gloria was describing was currently missing a load-bearing wall and suffering from severe water damage because Diane decided she could handle amateur plumbing. "But we live in a cruel, unforgiving world," Gloria said, her tone shifting from sorrowful to righteously indignant. That beautiful sanctuary was recently purchased by a faceless corporate holding company, a massive, soulless entity that cares nothing for the people who make this city a community. The moment they took over, they began a campaign of terror against my daughter. I leaned against the mahogany-paneled wall, crossing my arms over my chest. The sheer audacity of the lie was breathtaking. I was the faceless corporate entity she was demonizing, and my campaign of terror consisted entirely of sending legally required notices, asking Diane to pay the rent she had skipped for 14 consecutive months. They demanded exorbitant fabricated fees. Gloria cried out, her voice rising in pitch. They made up imaginary damages to the property just to harass her. Diane tried to reason with them. She tried to show them how lovingly she had cared for the home. But you cannot reason with a heartless, greedy corporate landlord. They do not see a human being. They only see dollar signs. And now they have pushed through a rapid, merciless eviction. Gloria paused dramatically, letting the weight of her fabricated tragedy settle over the affluent crowd. She reached into her emerald clutch and produced a pristine white tissue. She pressed it delicately beneath her eyes, forcing out a few highly convincing tearless sobs. They are throwing a defenseless woman out onto the streets right before the holidays. Gloria wept into the microphone. They are casting her and her innocent rescue dogs out into the cold without a shred of human decency. It breaks my heart as a mother to see my perfect, responsible child crushed by such unchecked corporate greed. The performance was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. The crowd reacted exactly as Gloria had trained them to. A chorus of horrified gasps rippled through the banquet hall. Mrs. Wentworth, a woman who owned half the car dealerships in the county, clutched her pearls in genuine shock. Mr. Abernathy, my father's tennis partner, shook his head in absolute disgust, muttering loud curses about the decay of modern business ethics. Diane sat at the front table, dabbing her dry eyes with a monogrammed silk napkin. She reached out and squeezed my father's hand, soaking up the collective attention and victimhood like a sponge. She was practically glowing under the spotlight of their faux sympathy. "That is why we called you all here tonight," Gloria said, recovering her composure with remarkable speed. "We have set up a relocation fund to help Diane secure a new home and fight these imaginary charges in court. We know that times are tough, but we also know the power of community." As if acting on a synchronized cue, the wealthy guests began opening their designer handbags and reaching into their tailored suit jackets. Checkbooks bound in premium leather were placed on the white tablecloths. Gold and silver fountain pens flashed in the dim light. They were buying the lie, completely eager to write off a few $1,000s to feel like saviors defending a poor, helpless victim from the big bad corporate monster. We had hoped to keep this strictly within the family. Gloria added, her eyes scanning the room until they locked onto the shadows by the coat check. She spotted me. Her lips curled into a tiny, triumphant smirk before she smoothed her features back into a mask of pious suffering. But unfortunately, some blood relatives have proven to be just as cold and selfish as the corporate landlords. Some family members refuse to offer even a sliver of support. So we must rely on you, our true family, to help right this terrible wrong. Every head in the room began to turn, following Gloria's pointed gaze toward the back of the banquet hall. The trap was fully sprung. By bringing me to a crowded room filled with their wealthiest friends, Gloria believed she had backed me into an inescapable corner. She assumed I would be too humiliated, too cowed by the weight of public pressure to do anything but walk forward with my head down and hand over a cashier's check to save face. She thought I would pay any price to avoid being branded the selfish, ungrateful daughter in front of polite society. I uncrossed my arms and stepped out of the shadows, the heels of my stilettos clicking sharply against the polished hardwood floor. I did not look down. I did not shrink away. I met my mother's gaze directly across the sea of open checkbooks and gasped breaths. The time for playing the obedient scapegoat was officially over. The heavy silence in the room stretched out thick and suffocating as every head turned toward the coat check alcove. I stood perfectly still, letting the collective weight of their judgment wash over me. For years, a moment like this would have sent me spiraling into a panic attack. I would have shrunk into myself, desperate to appease them, desperate to avoid the crushing embarrassment of public scrutiny. But tonight, the stares of 60 wealthy socialites felt like nothing more than a gentle breeze. Gloria did not miss a beat. Seeing me step forward, she gripped the silver microphone with both hands, leaning into it with a predatory gleam in her eyes. The sorrowful weeping mother routine instantly morphed into something darker, a toxic blend of condescension and weaponized pity. "Look who finally decided to join us," Gloria announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness that echoed off the crystal chandeliers. "Everyone, please turn your attention to the back of the room. This is my other daughter, Nicole." A low murmur rippled through the sea of tailored suits and evening gowns. I could see the guests leaning in, whispering behind their hands. Most of these people had no idea I existed. To them, Diane was the only child that mattered, the shining star of the family. I was the dark secret they kept hidden away in the basement of their perfect lives. Gloria let the whispers build for a moment before raising a hand to silence them. "I know many of you are not familiar with Nicole," she continued, projecting a heavy theatrical sigh. "She has always chosen to distance herself from our family. Nicole has struggled her whole life with failure. She could never quite find her footing in her career, always bouncing from one dead-end job to another. And of course, we all know the toll her unfortunate divorce took on her mental state. It has been a hard, bitter road for her." I kept my face entirely impassive, my eyes locked onto my mother. She was playing her ultimate trump card. By airing my most painful private struggles in front of a room full of strangers, she was trying to strip away my dignity. She was establishing a hierarchy where I was the broken, pathetic charity case, and she was the magnanimous matriarch, graciously allowing me to participate in their society. But despite her struggles, Gloria's voice swelled with manufactured pride. "Nicole is here tonight. She knows how desperately Diane needs our help to fight this heartless corporate landlord. Even though she lives paycheck to paycheck, even though she has barely anything to her name, she came here to empty her meager savings to help her sister. Isn't that right, Nicole?" The spotlight operator, clearly taking a cue from my mother, swung a secondary beam of light directly onto me. I was suddenly illuminated in a harsh, blinding circle of white light. The guests shifted in their seats, staring at me with a sickening mixture of pity and expectation. They were waiting for the poor, broken daughter to stumble forward and offer up her last few dollars as a sacrifice at the altar of Diane's manufactured martyrdom. "Bring your check up here, sweetie," Gloria commanded, the artificial sweetness hardening into an undeniable order. "Show everyone that even in your difficult circumstances, family comes first. Show them that you finally understand what it means to be part of this community." The pressure in the room was absolute. It was a physical force pressing down on my shoulders, designed to crush any remaining defiance. I looked toward the head table. Diane was no longer dabbing her eyes with her silk napkin. She was sitting up straight, staring at me with a cold, triumphant smirk. She mouthed a single word to me from across the room: "Pay." Beside her sat my father, Thomas. He had always been the silent enforcer of Gloria's emotional terrorism. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the white tablecloth, his jaw clenched so tightly I could see the muscle ticking from 50 feet away. His eyes bored into mine, dark and furious. He gave me a sharp, aggressive nod, mouthing the words, "Do it. Now." They thought they had won. They thought the sheer terror of public humiliation would force me into compliance. They expected me to reach into my designer clutch, pull out a trembling checkbook, and hand over the extortion money just to make the staring stop. I did not reach for my clutch. Instead, I shifted my gaze slightly to the left, catching the eye of Brian, who was still standing by the host stand. I gave him a single deliberate nod. Brian stepped forward immediately, his expression entirely stoic, and handed me the thick, heavy manila folder we had prepared. The murmurs in the room changed frequency. The guests exchanged confused glances. This was not part of the script Gloria had written for them. They expected a tearful, embarrassed handover of a check. They did not expect a woman in a tailored midnight blue suit stepping into the light holding a massive stack of legal documents. I gripped the manila folder in my right hand and took my first step toward the stage. The sharp, rhythmic clicking of my stiletto heels echoed against the hardwood floor, cutting through the uneasy silence of the banquet hall. I did not rush. I walked with slow, measured precision, my posture perfectly straight, my head held high. I did not look at the wealthy socialites seated at the tables. I kept my eyes locked entirely on my mother and my sister. As I closed the distance, I saw the first cracks appear in their flawless facades. Gloria's grip on the microphone faltered. Her artificial smile wavered, replaced by a fleeting shadow of genuine confusion. This was the moment she realized I was not wearing thrift store clothes. The stage lights caught the authentic diamond necklace resting at my throat, fracturing the light into a dozen brilliant prisms. She saw the cut of my suit, the confident, unbothered way I commanded the space. Diane's smirk vanished entirely. She sat back in her chair, her hands dropping below the table. She looked at our father, seeking reassurance, but Thomas was equally bewildered. He half stood, his napkin slipping from his lap to the floor, recognizing that the frightened, obedient daughter they had summoned was not the woman walking toward them. I reached the base of the small stage and stopped. I was close enough now to see the beads of sweat forming on my mother's forehead, close enough to hear her ragged, uneven breathing over the sound system. She tried to recover, forcing her rigid smile back into place. Nicole Gloria said, her voice dropping into a tense, warning whisper that the microphone barely caught. "What are you doing? Just hand me the check and sit down. Do not embarrass us." I stood perfectly still, looking up at her. The air in the room was electric heavy with the realization that the carefully orchestrated charity gala was about to violently derail. I did not have a checkbook. I had the truth bound in manila and stamped by a superior court judge, and I was about to serve it to them on a silver platter. I took a deep breath, raised the folder, and prepared to dismantle their entire world. But before I could even open my mouth to speak, a voice cut through the suffocating tension of the banquet hall. It was sharp, loud, and completely devoid of the reverent sympathy my mother demanded. "Aunt Gloria, before Nicole donates, I have a financial question." I turned my head. Stepping out from the shadows of a front-row table was my cousin Jamal. He was holding a crystal glass of ice water, looking entirely too relaxed for a man about to detonate a social grenade. Jamal had always been the black sheep on my father's side of the family, the one relative who refused to play along with Gloria's meticulously crafted illusions. His mother, my Aunt Melanie, was seated right behind him, her eyes already wide with absolute horror. Jamal took a slow, deliberate sip of his water. The ice clinked against the glass, the sound echoing in the dead, silent room. He stepped fully into the spillover light from the stage, his gaze locked onto my mother. He swirled the water in his glass, completely unbothered by the heavy stares of 60 wealthy socialites. Did this evil landlord evict you for no reason? Jamal asked, his voice projecting effortlessly to the back of the room. Or was it because you are 3 months behind on rent and destroyed the property's hardwood floors? The collective gasp from the wealthy guests was genuine this time. Checkbooks that had been open and ready were suddenly frozen. Gold fountain pens hovered over the paper, hesitant. The narrative of the poor, defenseless victim had just hit a massive, jagged roadblock. Jamal only had a fraction of the truth: 3 months of missed rent instead of the actual 14, but it was more than enough to shatter the illusion. He even knew Gloria had co-signed the lease, wrapping her directly into the eviction drama. On the stage, Gloria turned a sickly shade of ash gray. The color drained from her face so fast, the heavy layers of designer makeup she wore suddenly looked like a tragic mask. Her grip on the silver microphone stand tightened until her knuckles turned bone white. She stared down at her nephew, her lips trembling with a mixture of shock and unfiltered rage. "How dare you!" Gloria spat into the microphone, her voice dropping its artificial sweetness entirely. The sound cracked like a whip across the dining room. "Who do you think you are, speaking to me like that?" From the table behind him, Aunt Melanie scrambled to her feet. Her face was flushed with profound embarrassment, terrified of losing her tenuous standing in Gloria's elite social circle. She lunged forward, her manicured hands reaching out to grab Jamal's arm. "Jamal, stop it right now!" Melanie hissed, her voice frantic and pleading. "You are embarrassing the family. Sit down and apologize to your aunt this instant." Jamal did not even flinch. With a smooth, effortless motion, he shook off his mother's frantic grip. He stepped just out of her reach, keeping his eyes fixed dead ahead on the stage. "I am not embarrassing anyone, Mom," Jamal replied calmly, his voice carrying the distinct ring of truth. "I am just asking for a little financial transparency. Aunt Gloria is up here asking these generous people to open their wallets to fight a corporate monster. I think the donors have a right to know what they are actually funding. So, Aunt Gloria, why do you not tell the crowd about the unpermitted renovations Diane tried to do, or the massive water damage she caused?" The murmurs in the banquet hall transformed into loud, chaotic whispers. Mrs. Wentworth, the auto dealership mogul who had been weeping into her napkin just moments before, slowly closed her leather checkbook and placed her pen back into her purse. Mr. Abernathy leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms, his expression shifting from sympathetic outrage to deep suspicion. The wealthy elite do not like being played for fools, and Jamal was handing them the strings of the puppet show. I stood at the base of the stage watching the beautiful chaos unfold. I had never discussed my real estate portfolio with Jamal. I had kept my identity as the corporate holding company a total secret, but Jamal was incredibly sharp. He worked as an independent contractor in the city, and he knew the local real estate market inside and out. He must have recognized the property address when Diane started complaining about her eviction on social media, pulled the public court records, and connected the dots. He saw me walk into the room, holding a thick manila folder, and immediately understood that the reckoning had arrived. He was serving the appetizer before I delivered the main course. Diane bolted upright from her chair at the head table. The cashmere wrap slipped from her shoulders, pooling on the floor behind her. Her face was no longer the picture of tragic victimhood. It was flushed and ugly, mottled red. "You are a liar!" Diane shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at Jamal. "You have always been a jealous, spiteful liar. Nicole put you up to this. She paid you to come here and ruin my night." Jamal let out a short, sharp laugh. "Diane, nobody has to pay me to point out the obvious. You have been living beyond your means for a decade, and now the bill is finally due. Blaming Nicole for your destroyed credit score is just lazy." My father Thomas surged to his feet. The heavy wooden chair he had been sitting in scraped violently against the hardwood floor, tipping backward and crashing to the ground. He looked like a cornered bull, his chest heaving under his tailored suit jacket. "That is enough," Thomas bellowed, his deep voice overpowering the murmurs of the crowd. "Jamal, you get out of this room right now. You are not welcome here. You are trespassing on a private event." Security. Where is the security? Aunt Melanie covered her face with her hands, practically collapsing back into her seat. Oh God, she whimpered. Thomas, I am so sorry. I do not know what has gotten into him. He is ruining everything. But Jamal held his ground. He did not retreat toward the heavy oak doors. He stood firmly in the aisle, raising his glass of water in a mock toast toward the stage. Call security if you want. Uncle Thomas, Jamal set his tone entirely conversational. But kicking me out is not going to erase the public eviction notice stamped by the Superior Court judge. It is not going to fix the hardwood floors Diane's neglected dogs ruined. And it certainly is not going to convince these smart business people to hand over their hard-earned cash to fund a squatter. The word squatter hung in the air, sharp and devastating. It was the ultimate insult in this room full of property owners and investors. The crowd's reaction was instantaneous. More checkbooks snapped shut. The sympathetic energy that Gloria had so carefully cultivated evaporated entirely, replaced by a cold, calculating skepticism. The guests were looking at my mother and sister with narrowed eyes, realizing they had been invited to a scam. Gloria was hyperventilating now. She gripped the microphone stand so hard it began to rattle against the wooden stage. She looked out at her wealthy friends, watching her social standing disintegrate in real time. She turned her panicked, furious eyes toward me, desperate for a lifeline, desperate for a scapegoat to deflect the blame. Nicole Gloria hissed, her voice trembling with absolute venom. Tell him he is lying. Tell them all he is lying. Hand me that check and prove you support your sister. Do it right now, or I swear to you, you will never set foot in our house again. The ultimatum was empty. It was the frantic, thrashing demand of a drowning woman trying to drag someone else down with her. I looked at my mother, then at Diane's furious, panicked face, and finally at my father, who was still shouting for security. They had built a house of cards, and Jamal had just kicked away the foundation. I stepped up onto the first wooden stair leading to the stage. My stilettos clicked loudly, drawing the attention of the entire room back to me. I walked directly past my father, ignoring his aggressive posture. I walked past Diane, who shrank back slightly as I approached. I moved to the center of the stage, standing right next to my mother. I did not hand her a check. Instead, I lifted the heavy manila folder and dropped it flat onto the wooden podium right next to the microphone. The thick stack of legal documents hit the wood with a heavy, satisfying thud. The elite of our city, the people Gloria had spent decades trying to impress, were now a captive audience to her destruction. I saw Jamal standing in the aisle, a knowing smile playing on his lips. He raised his glass to me slightly, giving me the floor. He had struck the first blow, shattering the illusion, but it was my turn to deliver the killing strike. Before I could even open the folder to deliver that final fatal blow to their carefully constructed reality, my father decided he could no longer remain a spectator. The sight of Jamal standing defiantly in the aisle, raising a glass to my arrival, was too much for Thomas's fragile, domineering ego to handle. He had spent his entire life bullying this family into absolute submission through intimidation and volume. He firmly believed he could bully his way out of this disaster too. Thomas abandoned his position next to Diane at the head table. He marched down the center aisle, his heavy, aggressive footsteps echoing over the nervous whispers of the banquet hall. His face was flushed, a dark, angry crimson, the veins pulsing visibly at his temples. He moved with the singular, violent purpose of a man accustomed to crushing dissent the moment it sparked. He stopped mere inches from Jamal, using his massive frame to physically block his nephew from the view of the wealthy donors. Thomas leaned in close, attempting to utilize the same looming, threatening posture that had terrified me throughout my entire childhood. The room was so deadly quiet that even though Thomas dropped his voice to a dangerous, gravelly hiss, the acoustics of the hall carried his words to every single table. "Know your place in this family, Jamal." Thomas growled, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. "You do not disrespect Gloria in front of our friends. You will shut your mouth, turn around and walk out of this restaurant right now, before I make you regret ever showing up." Aunt Melanie whimpered from her seat, pressing her hands against her mouth in sheer terror. The surrounding guests froze, watching the confrontation unfold with morbid, breathless fascination. They expected the younger man to fold under the intense, aggressive pressure. They expected Jamal to lower his head and retreat, just as everyone in the family had always done when Thomas laid down the law. But Jamal did not shrink away. He did not lower his gaze. He stood tall, his posture completely relaxed, entirely unbothered by the towering red-faced man trying to physically intimidate him. He took another slow, deliberate sip from his crystal glass, swallowing the ice water with agonizing leisure before meeting my father's furious stare. "My place," Jamal asked, his voice steady, carrying a sharp, ringing clarity that sliced through the tension of the room. "You want to talk about my place in this family? Uncle Thomas, are you referring to the place where I quietly wire $50,000 to your private accounts every quarter to cover the mortgages on your failing investment properties?" Thomas visibly recoiled, taking a sudden, involuntary step backward. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and suddenly very old. A collective gasp swept through the wealthy socialites seated around them. Mr. Abernathy, who had just last week listened to Thomas brag about his vast real estate successes on the golf course, stared at my father with utter disbelief. "Yes, let us talk about my place," Jamal continued, stepping forward now, forcing Thomas to retreat another step. "My place is apparently being the guy who bails you out of bankruptcy twice a year, while you and Aunt Gloria sit at your exclusive country club dinners and insult my heritage behind my back. My place is funding your luxury lifestyle while you make disparaging remarks about my father's background to anyone who will listen. So keeping all that in mind, Uncle Thomas, I think I will speak however I want tonight." The silence that followed was absolute destruction. Thomas stood paralyzed in the middle of the aisle, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. His entire identity, the wealthy, successful, commanding patriarch, had just been publicly eviscerated by the very nephew he so openly despised. He had no defense. He had no lies left to spin. Jamal had stripped him of his power in front of the exact people Thomas spent his life trying to impress. On the stage, Gloria realized with sheer panic that she was losing the crowd entirely. The donors were not just putting away their checkbooks, they were exchanging looks of profound disgust. Her husband had just been exposed as a massive financial fraud, and her nephew had just revealed her deep-seated bigotry to her progressive elite social circle. The carefully manufactured charity event was collapsing into an incredibly ugly public scandal. Gloria did the only thing a true narcissist knows how to do when cornered. She deflected. She gripped the silver microphone stand so tightly her knuckles cracked, dragging it closer to her face. The audio system let out a high-pitched, piercing screech of feedback, making several guests wince and cover their ears. Gloria ignored the awful sound, her eyes wide, manic, and desperate. She needed to wrestle the narrative back from the brink of total annihilation. "Do not listen to him," Gloria shrieked into the microphone, her voice trembling with artificial hysteria. She pointed a frantic, shaking finger toward Jamal. "He is a liar. He is deeply disturbed, and he is just trying to ruin this evening because he has always been jealous of Diane. Do not let his toxic family drama distract you from the real tragedy here." She turned her wild, pleading eyes back to the audience, stretching her arms out as if begging for their mercy. "You all know," my daughter Gloria cried out, her voice breaking into a forced, desperate sob. "You know Diane is a victim. That eviction notice is real. The threat of her losing her home is real. This evil corporate landlord is targeting her. They are a monster. A greedy, soulless entity trying to destroy a defenseless woman right before the holidays. They are the enemy here, not us. We are fighting for survival against a multi-million-dollar corporation that wants to crush her for absolutely no reason." Diane nodded vigorously from her seat at the head table, forcing a fresh wave of tears to stream down her cheeks. She clasped her hands together in a prayer-like gesture, looking out at the audience, begging them to believe the story. She needed them to focus on the terrifying corporate boogeyman, to forget the ruined hardwood floors, the unpermitted renovations, and the 14 months of unpaid rent. "Please," Gloria wept, her voice echoing loudly through the banquet hall. "Do not let these petty distractions stop you from doing the right thing. The landlord is a monster. We have to stand together against them. We have to save my daughter from this ruthless, faceless company. I stood right beside her on the stage, listening to her frantic, desperate deflection. She was doubling down, throwing all her remaining energy into demonizing the property management firm. She was painting a vivid, terrifying picture of a corporate tyrant, entirely devoid of human empathy. I looked down at the thick manila folder resting on the wooden podium between us. It contained the original deed, the comprehensive ledger of Diane's missed payments, the photographic evidence of the property destruction, and the final eviction order. Gloria was desperately begging the room to hate the landlord, completely oblivious to the fact that the monster she was describing was standing inches away from her, waiting patiently for her to finish digging her own grave. I stepped up to the microphone. The polished wood of the stage creaked softly under my weight, but my posture remained entirely rigid. Gloria tried to block me, shifting her weight sideways to shield the stand, but her movements were sluggish, weighed down by the sheer, paralyzing shock of my defiance. I reached out and wrapped my hand around the cool metal of the microphone stand. I pulled it gently but firmly from her grasp. She surrendered it without a fight, her jaw trembling, her eyes darting frantically toward Thomas for a rescue that was never going to come. I looked directly at Jamal, who was still standing in the center aisle, holding his glass of water, like he was waiting for a toast. "Let me answer that for you, Jamal," I said. My voice echoed through the massive banquet hall. It was steady, stripped of all emotion, ringing with absolute unyielding authority. The faceless corporate monster my mother just spent 10 minutes crying about is called Horizon Logistics and Properties, LLC. I announced, sweeping my gaze across the sea of wealthy socialites. And Jamal is absolutely correct. The eviction is entirely real. But they did not evict her for no reason. And they certainly did not target her because she was the perfect tenant. I opened the manila folder I had dropped on the podium. The heavy paper made a sharp, tearing sound in the quiet room. I pulled out the stack of high-resolution photographs Brian had printed. I held up the first one, making sure the people at the front tables could see the gaping hole in the drywall and the exposed, splintered support beams. "This is the living room of the Maplewood property," I stated clearly. "This is the unpermitted demolition Diane ordered because she decided the layout did not suit her aesthetic. She knocked down a load-bearing wall in a house she did not own, causing $70,000 in structural damage." I tossed the photo onto the edge of the stage. It fluttered down, landing right near Mrs. Wentworth's feet. She picked it up, her eyes widening in absolute horror behind her designer glasses. I pulled out the next document. "This is the official accounting ledger. It shows 14 consecutive months of unpaid rent. 14 months where my sister lived in a luxury property for absolutely free, ignoring phone calls, dodging property managers, and treating a multi-million-dollar asset like her own personal playground." I gave Brian a sharp nod. He immediately began walking among the tables, handing out crisp, clear copies of the delinquency ledgers and the photos of the destroyed vintage hardwood floors. I wanted every single donor in the room to hold the physical proof of my family's fraud in their own hands. "Since my mother has asked you all to open your checkbooks for a relocation fund tonight, I believe you deserve full financial transparency regarding the woman you are being asked to subsidize," I added, watching the guests eagerly snatch up the documents. Gloria let out a strangled, breathless gasp. "Nicole, stop this right now! You are making a fool of yourself. You do not know what you are talking about." I turned to look at my mother. The heavy layers of makeup could not hide the sheer, unadulterated panic radiating from her. Her carefully constructed high society persona was melting into a puddle of terrified desperation. "I know exactly what I am talking about, Mother," I replied, my voice dropping to a dangerous, precise volume. "Because I am the one who signed the eviction notice." The silence in the room was absolute. It was the kind of quiet that precedes a catastrophic impact. I reached into the very back of the folder and pulled out the original property deed. It was printed on thick, watermarked parchment, complete with the gold-embossed seal of the county registrar. I walked down the steps of the stage. The crowd parted slightly as I approached the head table where Diane and Thomas were seated. Thomas was gripping the edges of his table, his knuckles white, staring at me, as if I had suddenly transformed into an alien creature. Diane looked physically ill, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath. Her arrogant smirk had been replaced by stark, genuine terror. Horizon Logistics and Properties LLC did not just evict Diane for the rent, I said, coming to a halt directly in front of my sister. They did not just evict her for the thousands of dollars in property damage. I leaned forward, planting both hands on the table, closing the distance between myself and the golden child who had tormented me for 3 decades. They evicted her because 6 months ago Diane came to my modest apartment. She stood in my living room, looked at my 2 young children who were still navigating the trauma of their parents' divorce, and told them that their mother was a pathetic, penniless failure who would never amount to anything. She told my kids that they were destined to struggle because I was too weak to provide for them. Diane swallowed hard, shaking her head in a frantic, jerky motion. "I did not mean it like that," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I was just giving you tough love." It was not love, I countered effortlessly. It was cruelty. And it was the last time you will ever speak to my children. I raised the heavy embossed property deed and dropped it flat onto the center of their table. It slid across the pristine white linen, coming to a dead stop right on top of Diane's empty dessert plate. The gold seal caught the light of the crystal chandeliers. Thomas reached out with a trembling hand, tracing the embossed seal, reading my name printed clearly as the sole managing member of the holding company. The patriarch who had just been publicly humiliated by Jamal was now realizing that the scapegoat daughter he had bullied into submission was the only one in the room with actual power. "I am the founder and CEO of Horizon Logistics and Properties." I declared, my words dropping like anvils onto the table. "I own the house at 4521 Maple. I own the entire block it sits on. I own the corporate entity you just begged your wealthy friends to fight." I stood up straight, smoothing the lapels of my midnight blue suit, feeling lighter than I had in my entire life. "And Diane," I finished, my voice ringing with total finality. "Mother, you both have exactly 48 hours left to get off my property before the sheriff physically drags you out." The silence that engulfed the banquet hall was so profound, it felt like a vacuum had sucked all the air out of the room. Not a single crystal glass clinked, not a single silver fork scraped against china. 60 of the city's wealthiest elites sat completely frozen in their velvet-backed chairs, their eyes darting between the heavy parchment deed resting on the table and my face. I stood tall, letting the gravity of my declaration settle over them. The gold-embossed seal of the county registrar glinted under the chandelier light, a silent, undeniable testament to my authority. Thomas looked as though he had been physically struck. His massive shoulders slumped, and the aggressive, domineering posture he had carried his entire life evaporated in a single instant. He stared at the legal document, his eyes tracking over my printed name, again and again, unable to reconcile the multi-million-dollar reality, sitting on the table with the worthless scapegoat daughter he had spent decades bullying. Diane was trembling so violently, her chair rattled against the hardwood floor. She gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, her mouth opening and closing, without producing a single sound. The smug, entitled golden child was gone, replaced by a terrified woman, realizing she was about to face the devastating consequences of her own arrogance. But Gloria simply refused to process the truth. Her mind, perfectly tuned to control every narrative, violently rejected the reality playing out in front of her. She could not accept that the daughter she had publicly humiliated for years was the very corporate titan she had just spent the evening demonizing. "You are lying!" Gloria screamed. Her voice shattered the silence, shrill and frantic. She lunged forward, stabbing a manicured finger toward my face. The heavy layers of her socialite persona cracked completely, exposing the vicious, desperate woman underneath. "You are a liar!" Gloria shrieked, her chest heaving as she spun around to face her wealthy friends. Do not listen to a word she says. This is a sick, twisted joke. Nicole does not own any holding company. She is broke. She sells junk online. She makes cheap crafts in a tiny apartment. She is just doing this to humiliate me because she is jealous of Diane. That piece of paper is a fake. Gloria grabbed the heavy parchment deed off Diane's plate and waved it frantically in the air. It is a forgery. She probably printed it off the internet to ruin this charity event. She has always been spiteful and disturbed. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to argue with her. I simply stood my ground, allowing her to unravel in front of the very people she was so desperate to impress. Her frantic, unhinged screaming was doing more damage to her reputation than I ever could. She is not lying. The new voice cut through Gloria's hysterical rant. It was calm, measured, and carried the undeniable weight of absolute professionalism. Every head in the room turned toward the back of the banquet hall. Brian stepped out of the shadows by the coat check and began walking down the center aisle. He moved with quiet, deliberate confidence. He wore a razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit that immediately commanded respect. He carried a sleek leather briefcase under one arm, looking every bit the high-powered corporate executive that he was. Gloria froze, the forged deed accusation dying on her lips. She stared at the imposing man walking toward her, completely bewildered. "Who are you?" Gloria demanded, her voice wavering. "Security. Get this man out of here." Brian ignored her command completely. He stopped halfway down the aisle, standing right next to the table where Mrs. Wentworth and Mr. Abernathy were seated. He adjusted his suit jacket and addressed the crowd directly. "My name is Brian Sterling," he announced, his voice projecting clearly across the room. "I am the senior property manager and lead legal counsel for Horizon Logistics and Properties, and I can assure everyone in this room that the deed Gloria is waving around is entirely authentic." He turned his sharp gaze toward the stage-locking eyes with my mother. "Nicole is not a liar," Brian stated firmly. "She is my boss. She is the founder and sole owner of Horizon. She does not sell junk online. She owns 15 commercial and residential properties in this zip code alone. She is one of the most successful real estate developers in the county, and she has been quietly building her empire while you spent years mocking her." The gasp that rippled through the room this time was deafening. The socialites murmured to one another, their eyes wide with shock. Mr. Abernathy leaned forward, looking from Brian to me with a newfound expression of profound respect. He recognized a brilliant business move when he saw one. Brian unclasped his leather briefcase. Furthermore, Brian continued, his tone shifting into a sharp clinical register. "Since we are discussing the eviction of Diane Henderson, I believe the donors being asked to fund her relocation deserve to see exactly why she is being removed from our property." He reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of high-resolution glossy photographs. He did not ask for permission. He simply began walking from table to table, tossing a handful of photos onto the center of each pristine white tablecloth. "Here are the photos of the damages your perfect tenant caused," Brian announced, dropping a stack directly in front of Mrs. Wentworth. "You will see the unauthorized demolition of a major load-bearing wall which Diane undertook without a single city permit or architectural consult. She compromised the structural integrity of a $2 million asset because she wanted an open-concept living room." He moved to the next table, tossing down more photos. "You will also see the ruin of original vintage mahogany hardwood floors, destroyed by animal neglect and improper care," Brian stated clearly. "And my personal favorite, the severe water damage in the master suite caused by Diane attempting to install luxury plumbing fixtures using an unlicensed handyman she hired off the internet. The repair quotes currently exceed $100,000. The wealthy guests snatched up the photographs. They passed them around the tables, their expressions shifting rapidly from shock to absolute disgust. They were looking at images of pure, entitled destruction. They saw the gaping holes in the drywall, the warped and ruined mahogany, the mold creeping up the baseboards from amateur plumbing disasters. They looked back at Diane, who was now weeping openly at the head table, burying her face in her hands. There was no sympathy left in the room for her. The narrative of the poor victimized tenant fighting a heartless corporation was dead and buried. These people were property owners themselves. They understood the horror of a destructive entitled tenant. They realized they had been invited to this lavish dinner not to support a victim, but to fund a scam. Gloria and Diane had tried to trick them into paying for the catastrophic property damage Diane had deliberately caused against her own sister. Gloria stood on the stage, completely paralyzed. The microphone slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a loud, ringing thud. She watched her closest friends push their checkbooks away in disgust. She watched her entire social standing, the empire of illusions she had spent decades building, evaporate into dust. Brian returned to my side, snapping his briefcase shut. He gave me a brief, professional nod. I looked back at my mother. "The game is over, Gloria," I said, my voice carrying a quiet, lethal finality. "You wanted to know my place in this family. My place is the landlord. And you are officially evicted." The echo of the word evicted hung over the banquet hall like a judge's final gavel strike. Gloria stared at me with wide, unblinking eyes, her mouth hanging open as her brain short-circuited. She had no retorts left, no deflections, no alternate realities to spin. The truth was a heavy, suffocating blanket that pinned her to the stage. I turned away from her and faced the sea of guests. These were the people my parents had worshipped. These were the country club presidents, the charity board members, the elite socialites whose approval Gloria craved more than she ever cared about her own daughter. I walked slowly to the center of the room, letting the ambient light catch the sharp lines of my suit. It was time to burn the rest of their script to ashes. For over a decade, my mother has stood in rooms exactly like this one, and told you all a very specific story about me. I began, my voice projecting clearly to the back walls. She told you I was the family failure. She called me a college dropout who could not hold down a real job. She painted me as a struggling, pathetic disappointment who crafted cheap trinkets in a miserable little apartment. I paused, making eye contact with Mr. Abernathy, then Mrs. Wentworth. While you all listened to her mock me for stepping away from the traditional path she demanded, I was busy building an e-commerce supply chain empire from the ground up, I declared. I did not drop out of school because I was lazy or incapable. I left because I saw a massive untapped gap in the regional logistics market, and I took a calculated risk to fill it. While Diane was maxing out credit cards to buy designer handbags she could not afford, I was securing my first warehouse lease. While my father was bleeding money into failing commercial properties, I was acquiring residential blocks, optimizing delivery routes, and turning a massive profit. Horizon Logistics and Properties was not handed to me. I built it with my own two hands, brick by brick, contract by contract, while my own family laughed behind my back. The guests sat in rapt attention. The shift in the room's energy was absolute. They were no longer looking at me with pity. They were looking at me with profound, undeniable respect. I had spoken their language. I had spoken the language of self-made success, and they recognized the sheer grit it took to achieve it. From his place in the aisle, Jamal raised his glass to me one more time, a silent gesture of absolute respect. I turned my gaze toward the head table where Diane was currently wiping her mascara-stained face with the back of her hand. "And then there is the favorite family talking point." I continued, my tone growing sharper. "My failed marriage. My mother loved to use my divorce as the ultimate proof of my brokenness. She loved to whisper to her friends about how I could not keep a husband, how I shattered my family because I was too difficult to love." I took a step closer to the head table, forcing my father to look at me. Leaving my ex-husband was not a failure, I stated, the fierce, protective anger of a mother rising in my chest. It was the smartest, bravest thing I have ever done. I walked away from a toxic, draining environment to protect my peace and to secure my children's future. I refused to let my kids grow up in a home where emotional manipulation and conditional love were the norm. I refused to let them normalize the exact same toxic behavior I was subjected to my entire life in this family. Getting divorced was not a tragedy. It was a rescue mission, and it gave me the absolute clarity I needed to focus on building my empire. My father looked down at his shoes. He had no aggressive posturing left. He was a deflated, broken man, realizing the daughter he discarded was the only one who actually possessed the strength he always pretended to have. He shrank back into his chair, effectively surrendering the battlefield to me. I pivoted back to the stage, locking my eyes entirely on Gloria. She was gripping the edges of the wooden podium, physically holding herself up. Her emerald green gown suddenly looked garish, like a cheap costume on a bad actor. "You love to stand up here and play the wealthy, benevolent matriarch," Gloria Wise said, my voice dropping into a cold, lethal register. "You love to judge everyone else's bank accounts and career choices. You look down your nose at anyone who does not meet your arbitrary social standards. But the truth is, you do not own anything." Gloria flinched as if I had struck her across the face. She opened her mouth to protest, but no sound came out. Her throat worked convulsively, but the lies had finally run dry. I took another step toward the stage, relentless. "You lease your luxury car," I revealed, watching the socialites in the room exchange shocked glances. "You leased my house for Diane because she could not pass a basic credit check, and then you secretly drained your retirement accounts, trying to cover her missed payments until you went broke. You are months behind on your country club dues. You buy designer clothes on credit and return them after wearing them once. You do not own a single piece of the wealth you flaunt. You are drowning in massive, insurmountable debt, maxing out high-interest credit lines just to maintain an illusion." I pointed a finger directly at her chest. "You organized this entire fraudulent charity gala tonight, not to fight a corporate monster, but to beg your wealthy friends to bail you out of your own catastrophic financial failures. You used my name and my supposed poverty to make yourself look like a saint. You are desperate to impress people who do not actually care about you, using money you do not even have." The silence that followed was completely devastating. Gloria looked out at the audience, her eyes wide with sheer panic. She was searching for a single sympathetic face, a single friend who would stand up and defend her. She found absolutely no one. The elite circle she had spent her entire life cultivating was looking back at her with unvarnished disgust. They hated being lied to, and they absolutely despised being used for a cheap grift. Mrs. Wentworth calmly reached into her purse, pulled out the check she had written earlier, and tore it neatly down the middle. She dropped the pieces onto her table. Several other guests immediately followed suit, the sound of tearing paper echoing through the banquet hall like a synchronized round of applause for my victory. Gloria let out a ragged, breathless sob. She covered her face with her trembling hands, finally shattered by the sheer crushing weight of reality. The illusion was dead. The empire of lies was completely burned to the ground, and I was the one holding the match. The sound of tearing paper continued to echo through the private dining room, each rip acting as a physical blow to the carefully constructed facade my family had maintained for decades. Gloria remained frozen behind the podium, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with ragged, silent sobs. The illusion was dead. The empire of lies was completely burned to the ground, and I was the one holding the match. But the absolute destruction of their social standing was not enough for Diane. She had spent her entire life shielded from the consequences of her own actions, firmly wrapped in the protective bubble of our parents' delusions. The reality of losing her luxury lifestyle, her social status, and her victim narrative all at once finally broke her. Diane shoved her chair back with such violent force that it tipped over and crashed loudly against the hardwood floor. She stormed around the edge of the head table, her face a horrific mess of running mascara and splotchy red fury. She pointed a shaking, accusing finger directly at my chest, completely ignoring the stunned glares of the wealthy donors sitting just feet away. "How could you do this to your own blood?" Diane screamed, her voice cracking with sheer, unadulterated entitlement. "You are a monster, Nicole. We are your family. You are supposed to protect us, and instead you come in here and humiliate us in front of all these people just because you are a bitter, jealous sociopath. You have all this money, and you chose to destroy your own blood." I did not take a single step back. I looked at my sister, watching her thrash in the ashes of her own making. Before I could deliver the final crushing response she so desperately deserved, I saw movement out of the corner of my eye. Jamal stepped up onto the stage. He moved with the same cool, unbothered confidence he had displayed all evening. He walked right past. My sobbing mother reached down to the polished wooden floor and picked up the silver microphone Gloria had dropped. He tapped the top of it twice, ensuring it was still live. The dull thumps reverberated through the banquet hall, instantly commanding the attention of every remaining guest. "Blood?" Jamal asked, his voice dripping with an icy, calm amusement. He looked down at Diane, who was still pointing her shaking finger at me. "You want to stand there and talk about loyalty to your own blood, Diane? That is incredibly bold, coming from someone who has spent her entire adult life treating this family like a personal ATM." Jamal stepped to the very edge of the stage, looking out over the sea of horrified socialites. He held the microphone casually, like a seasoned performer delivering the final act of a tragic play. "Let us talk about this sacred bloodline you are so desperate to defend," Jamal announced. "You want to paint Nicole as the villain for simply protecting her own assets. But the truth is, Thomas and Diane are over $100,000 in debt right now. They maxed out every line of credit they could get their hands on just to fund Diane's ridiculous lifestyle and cover up Thomas's massive, glaring investment failures." Thomas let out a strangled, breathless sound from his seat at the head table. He looked as though he might physically be sick. Aunt Melanie, Jamal's mother, shrank down in her chair, pressing her napkin against her face as the brutal, unvarnished truth was finally dragged into the light. "They walk around this country club and these charity galas acting like royalty," Jamal continued, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. "They only pretend my mother Melanie is the successful one. They pretend they are this wealthy elite dynasty. Do you want to know why they have been able to keep up that charade for so long? Because I am the one who pays off their credit cards every single month. I am the one who quietly wires the funds to keep the bank from foreclosing on the remaining properties they have not already lost." The wealthy guests shifted in their seats, utterly repulsed by the sheer magnitude of the financial deception. These were people who respected actual wealth, actual business acumen. The realization that they had been invited to a dinner hosted by a family of absolute frauds was turning their initial shock into profound, burning anger. "I have spent the last 5 years funding their delusions because my mother begged me to keep the peace," Jamal said, his gaze locking onto Thomas, whose face was now completely devoid of color. "But watching them stand up here tonight, watching them try to extort Nicole, while simultaneously treating her like garbage, that is where I draw the line. So let me be very clear, Uncle Thomas. Let me be perfectly clear, Diane. As of tonight, that ATM is permanently closed. I am cutting you off, every single dime. You are entirely on your own." Jamal lowered the microphone. He did not drop it. He placed it carefully on the wooden podium right next to the massive, undeniable stack of evidence I had provided. He gave me one final respectful nod, then stepped off the stage and walked straight down the center aisle, leaving the burning wreckage of our family behind him. The reaction from the crowd was instantaneous and devastating. The elite of our city do not tolerate being played for fools, and they absolutely despise the stench of fake wealth. Mrs. Wentworth was the first to move. She stood up, smoothing the front of her designer dress with sharp, angry motions. She did not even look toward the stage. She turned to Mr. Abernathy, who was already rising from his seat. "This is the most appalling, tasteless display I have ever witnessed in my entire life," Mrs. Wentworth announced, her voice carrying the sharp, cutting edge of old money authority. "To think we were invited here under the guise of charity, only to be subjected to the pathetic begging of a financially ruined, deceitful family. It is utterly repulsive." Mr. Abernathy nodded in absolute agreement, buttoning his tailored suit jacket. "I will be speaking with the country club board tomorrow morning," he stated firmly, glaring directly at Thomas. "We do not maintain memberships for frauds. Expect your resignation papers by noon, Thomas." That was the signal. The floodgates opened. The wealthy friends, the prominent socialites, the real estate brokers, and the church leaders all stood up in unison. The sound of chairs scraping against the hardwood floor echoed like a chaotic symphony of social death. They began walking out of the ballroom. They did not stop to say goodbye. They did not offer any parting words of sympathy. They marched toward the heavy oak doors, with expressions of profound disgust, leaving behind torn checks and half-eaten catered dinners. They walked right past Diane, who had collapsed onto the floor, clutching her knees to her chest, sobbing uncontrollably as her entire universe was ripped away from her. I stood on the stage watching the mass exodus. Gloria finally lifted her face from her hands, her mascara running in dark, jagged streams down her cheeks. She looked out at the rapidly emptying banquet hall, reaching out a trembling hand toward the retreating backs of the people she had spent her life trying to impress. She tried to call out to them, to beg them to stay, but her voice was completely gone. In less than 3 minutes, the massive golden-lit room was entirely deserted, save for the broken remnants of my family. The silence that settled over the private dining room was heavy, final, and absolutely absolute. The grand charity gala had transformed into a mausoleum for their pride. I looked down at the forged reality they had worshipped, knowing that they would never ever recover from this night. The heavy oak doors of the private dining room swung shut, cutting off the last echoing footsteps of the departing socialites. We were entirely alone. The sprawling banquet hall designed to host the most opulent celebrations in the city now felt like a massive glittering tomb. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint mechanical hum of the central air conditioning and the ragged, wet sounds of Diane weeping on the floor. I stood on the stage looking out over the sea of abandoned tables. It was a picturesque scene of total financial and social ruin. Half-eaten plates of expensive catering sat growing cold. Crystal wine glasses were abandoned mid-sip, and scattered across the pristine white tablecloths were the torn, jagged pieces of personal checks, the ultimate symbol of Gloria's failed extortion. Thomas had not moved a single muscle since Mr. Abernathy stripped him of his country club membership. He remained frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the far wall. The blustering, aggressive patriarch who had terrorized this family for decades had been completely hollowed out. Jamal had exposed his hidden debts, and in doing so had severed the invisible strings Thomas used to control everyone around him. He was nothing now, just a broke, aging man sitting in a rented tuxedo he could no longer afford. But the true collapse was happening right at my feet. Gloria slowly lowered her hands from her face. The flawless, aristocratic mask she had spent her entire life perfecting was entirely gone. Her expensive cosmetics were smeared across her cheeks in dark, muddy streaks. Her perfectly coiffed hair was disheveled, clinging to her damp forehead. She looked around the empty ballroom, her wide, bloodshot eyes frantically searching for a reality that no longer existed. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The illusion was shattered. Her wealthy friends despised her. Her husband was drowning in debt. Her golden child was facing imminent eviction. And the scapegoat daughter she had relentlessly abused was the multi-million-dollar landlord holding the keys to their survival. She was truly, undeniably broke. She was homeless in every sense of the word that mattered to her. Gloria let out a raw, guttural sound that tore from the very bottom of her chest. It was not the theatrical, rehearsed sob she had used on the microphone just 20 minutes prior. This was the visceral, ugly wail of a narcissist facing absolute destruction. She stumbled forward, her legs giving out beneath her. She fell hard onto her knees at the base of the wooden stage. The luxurious emerald green evening gown pooled around her on the polished hardwood floor, gathering dust. She reached out with trembling, desperate hands, her manicured fingers clawing at the hem of my tailored midnight blue trousers. "Nicole, please," Gloria begged. Her voice was unrecognizable, stripped of all its artificial sweetness and condescension. It was a pathetic, scratching plea. "You cannot do this. You cannot leave us like this. I have nowhere to go. We have absolutely nothing left." I looked down at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had spent 30 years making me feel completely worthless. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. I felt an absolute profound emptiness toward her, cold and clear as glacial ice. Please, Nicole. Gloria sobbed, real heavy tears streaming down her ruined face and dripping onto the floorboards. I am your mother. Diane is your sister. We are your family. You cannot do this to family. You have so much money. You own so many properties. You can easily fix this. Just let Diane stay in the house. Just pay off these debts. I am begging you. She tightened her grip on my pant leg, looking up at me with desperate, pleading eyes. She was waiting for the frightened, eager-to-please daughter to resurface. She was praying that the lifetime of conditioning she had instilled in me would automatically trigger my compliance. I reached down and firmly pried her trembling fingers off my suit. I stepped back, severing the physical connection between us. I looked down at her with absolute ice in my eyes. Do not dare use the word family with me, I said, my voice echoing coldly through the empty ballroom. You lost the right to use that word the day you decided my sole purpose on this earth was to fund your delusions. Gloria opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off. My tone, dropping to a dangerous razor-sharp edge. You did not care about family when you allowed Diane to torment me for years. You did not care about family when you tried to extort my hard-earned savings to cover up her massive property damage. But above all else, Gloria, you did not care about family when you sent Diane to my home. I took a slow, deliberate step closer to the edge of the stage, looming over her. You sent her into my safe space, I stated, enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. You allowed her to look my innocent children in the eyes and tell them their mother was a pathetic failure. You made my children cry. You tried to humiliate me in front of the entire city. You tried to rip away my dignity just to save your own skin. Gloria shrank back, her breath catching in her throat as the sheer magnitude of her fatal miscalculation finally settled over her. I reached into my blazer pocket, pulled out the official eviction notice I had brought with me, and let it flutter down onto the floor right in front of her knees. You have exactly 48 hours, Gloria, I commanded, my voice devoid of any mercy. When that clock runs out, the county sheriff will be at that property to physically escort both of you off the premises. Do not try to stall. Do not try to negotiate. And do not leave any of your trash behind when you go. I turned my back on my mother. I walked across the wooden stage and descended the side stairs, my stilettos clicking rhythmically against the floor. I did not spare a single glance for Diane, who was still curled in a weeping ball by the head table, or for Thomas, who remained paralyzed in his chair of defeat. They were ghosts to me now, relics of a past I had completely outgrown. Jamal was waiting for me in the center aisle. He stood tall, his hands tucked casually into his pockets, an expression of profound respect on his face. We did not need to exchange a single word. We shared the silent, unspoken bond of two survivors who had just successfully dismantled the very system designed to break us. Jamal offered his arm. I looped my hand through the crook of his elbow. Together we walked down the long carpeted aisle of the private dining room. We pushed through the heavy oak doors, stepping out of the glittering, suffocating mausoleum and into the quiet, dimly lit lobby of the restaurant. Brian was waiting near the valet stand, holding my coat and briefcase. He gave us a professional, satisfied nod as we approached. We walked out through the front glass doors of the Sterling and stepped into the crisp, cool night air of the city. The heavy burden I had carried on my shoulders for 3 decades was entirely gone. I took a deep, cleansing breath, feeling the absolute, undeniable rush of total freedom. I had protected my children, secured my empire, and burned their toxic illusion to the ground. I was finally truly free. 60 days later, the crisp autumn air had given way to the biting, unforgiving chill of early winter. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine idling softly, the heater wrapping me in a cocoon of quiet warmth. I was parked directly across the street from 4521 Maple. The neighborhood was peaceful, lined with manicured lawns and towering oak trees that had long since shed their leaves. It was a picture of upscale suburban tranquility, starkly contrasting the absolute chaos unfolding in my property's driveway. I took a slow sip of my black coffee, keeping my eyes fixed on the front door. I had given them 48 hours, but the sluggish gears of the municipal court system and a few desperate last-minute delay tactics filed by their bargain bin attorney had dragged the process out to exactly 60 days. It did not matter. The final destination was always going to be the same. The clock had officially run out. Two white county sheriff's cruisers turned onto the quiet street, their red and blue lights flashing in rhythmic silent authority against the gray morning sky. They pulled up to the curb right in front of the house, parking directly behind a rusted, dented U-Haul truck that looked like it had barely survived a cross-country road trip. The heavy, imposing figures of two uniformed deputies stepped out of their vehicles and walked purposefully up the paved driveway. There was no grand audience today. There were no country club presidents to manipulate, no wealthy socialites to impress, and no charity galas to hijack. There was only the cold, hard reality of consequence. The heavy oak front door swung open. The deputies did not have to breach it. They simply stood on the porch, hands resting near their duty belts, enforcing the legal mandate of my ownership. Gloria emerged first. The sight of her sent a profound, quiet satisfaction settling into my chest. The polished, aristocratic matriarch, who had commanded the private dining room at the Sterling, was completely gone. In her place was an exhausted, defeated woman moving with the sluggish, heavy steps of someone carrying the weight of total ruin. Her perfectly highlighted hair was tied back in a messy, careless knot. The emerald green evening gowns and tailored blazers had been replaced by a faded gray tracksuit that offered no protection against the biting winter wind. She was not directing a team of professional white-glove movers. There were no hired hands to carefully box up her fabricated life. Gloria was physically dragging two massive overstuffed trash bags down the porch steps. Slung over her shoulder were three oversized designer tote bags. From my vantage point across the street, I could clearly see the frayed stitching and the peeling synthetic leather. Without Jamal's money to fund her shopping sprees, the authentic luxury goods had been repossessed or sold off weeks ago to pay mounting legal fees. The knockoff bags she was hauling now were the perfect, pathetic metaphor for her entire existence. Diane followed close behind her, looking equally destroyed. The golden child was struggling to carry a heavy cardboard box overflowing with shoes and tangled hangers. Her face was puffy and red, her posture hunched as she shuffled past the sheriff's deputies. She refused to make eye contact with them, entirely consumed by the crushing humiliation of being physically escorted off the premises by law enforcement. Thomas brought up the rear, carrying a cheap plastic laundry basket filled with bathroom toiletries and loose cables. He looked hollowed out, a ghost of the domineering patriarch who used to terrify me. He loaded the basket into the back of the rusted U-Haul, his movements stiff and defeated. I watched them work in the freezing cold entirely alone. Not a single person from their elite social circle had shown up to help them pack. Not a single church friend or tennis partner had offered them a driveway to park their moving truck. The moment the wealthy elite of our city realized Gloria and Thomas were frauds, the social excommunication had been absolute and instantaneous. They were pariahs, completely cut off from the network they had sacrificed my mental health to maintain. The financial and social shockwave of that night at the Sterling had completely shattered the wider family unit. Jamal had made good on his promise before the sun even rose the next morning. He permanently severed his financial ties, freezing the accounts and locking the family out of his wealth. The sudden violent withdrawal of his funds forced a brutal reckoning. Aunt Melanie, stripped of the unearned prestige she had enjoyed, found herself drowning in the massive debts she had hidden from her husband. The revelation of her financial enabling and deep complicity in Gloria's toxic schemes had been the final straw. Jamal formally severed all ties with his mother's toxic influence, stepping completely away from the family's dysfunction. The betrayal shattered Melanie's marriage, and her husband immediately filed for a highly contentious divorce, leaving her to face the crushing reality of her own financial ruin without a single lifeline from the son she had used. Thomas and Gloria were faring no better. The stress of losing everything had turned them against each other. I had heard through Brian that they spent their days screaming in the echoing empty halls of the Maple property, blaming one another for the collapse of their empire. There was no loyalty left among thieves. I watched as Gloria shoved her knockoff bags into the back of the moving truck. She wiped a hand across her forehead, leaving a smudge of dirt on her pale face. She looked exhausted, broken, and entirely stripped of her power. She paused for a moment, turning her head to look out at the street. Her eyes swept over the parked cars lingering on my sleek, tinted windows. Even through the glass, I knew she could feel my presence. I did not roll down the window. I did not wave. I simply sat in the warmth of my hard-earned success and watched her realize that the daughter she threw away was the only reason she had a roof over her head for the past 14 months. Brian stepped out of his own vehicle parked a few houses down. He was accompanied by a licensed locksmith. He walked up the driveway exchanging a brief professional nod with the sheriff's deputies. He stood by the front door waiting patiently for Diane to carry out her final box of belongings. The moment she cleared the threshold, the locksmith went to work. The heavy metallic click of the new deadbolt sliding into place echoed across the quiet suburban street. The sound was incredibly satisfying. It was the sound of a chapter permanently closing. Thomas slammed the roll-up door of the U-Haul shut. He secured the rusted latch and climbed into the driver's seat. Gloria and Diane squeezed into the passenger side, their expressions utterly miserable as the truck's engine sputtered and roared to life. A cloud of dark exhaust plumed into the cold air as the truck lurched forward, slowly rolling down the street and out of my neighborhood. They were gone. The toxic infection that had plagued my life for 3 decades had been entirely excised. I took one last look at the beautiful sprawling house at 4521 Maple. It belonged to me. My company, my future, and my peace were entirely secure. I placed my coffee in the cup holder, shifted my car into drive, and pulled smoothly away from the curb. I did not look in the rearview mirror. There was absolutely nothing left behind me worth looking at. Almost a full year had passed since that freezing morning when I watched the rusted U-Haul truck sputter out of my neighborhood. The bitter, biting cold of that eviction day had long since melted away, replaced now by the crisp, golden warmth of a perfect Thanksgiving afternoon. I stood in the massive, newly renovated kitchen of the property at 4521 Maple, breathing in the rich, comforting aromas of roasted turkey, fresh rosemary, and warm cinnamon. I was not sitting at my parents' toxic dinner table. I was not gripping my napkin under the table waiting for Gloria to launch her first passive-aggressive insult about my clothing. I was not bracing myself for Thomas to demand a check to cover his latest catastrophic investment failure. I was not biting my tongue while Diane bragged about a luxury lifestyle I was secretly subsidizing. That miserable, suffocating tradition was dead and buried. Instead, I was hosting a massive, warm, and profoundly joyful dinner in the very house that had once been the center of their fraudulent empire. The transformation of the Maple Street property was absolute. After the sheriff escorted Gloria and Diane off the premises, I had sent my best contracting teams into the house. We did not just repair the damage Diane had caused, we entirely reimagined the space. The gaping hole where she had illegally torn down a load-bearing wall was now a stunning, structurally sound archway that seamlessly connected the kitchen to the grand dining room. The ruined vintage mahogany floors had been painstakingly restored to their original breathtaking luster. The disastrous master bathroom plumbing had been completely ripped out and replaced with a flawless, fully permitted spa retreat. I had taken the wreckage of my sister's entitlement and turned it into a masterpiece. I walked over to the sprawling kitchen island and picked up 2 glasses of chilled apple cider. I stepped through the glass patio doors and out onto the expansive wooden deck overlooking the backyard. The sound of pure, uninhibited laughter echoed across the manicured lawn. My children Leo and Sophie were running at full speed, chasing a football under the shade of the towering oak trees. Their faces were flushed with sheer happiness. There was no hesitation in their movements, no anxiety in their bright eyes. The cruel, venomous words Diane had spit at them all those months ago had been entirely erased by the overwhelming security and love that now surrounded them. They knew their mother was not a failure. They knew their mother was an immovable fortress who would protect them against any threat, even if that threat shared our last name. Incoming, Jamal shouted, catching the football Leo had launched in his direction. Jamal spun around, dodging a playful tackle from Sophie, and tossed the ball back with a loud, booming laugh. My cousin looked healthier and happier than I had ever seen him. The heavy, exhausting burden of funding his mother's social climbing and bailing out his uncle's bankruptcies was entirely gone. When he permanently closed his wallet to the family, he opened up his own future. He had reinvested his money into his own contracting business, which was now booming, and he had remained one of my closest, most trusted friends. We had bonded over our shared liberation. We were the family scapegoats, who had successfully staged a bloodless coup, and the victory looked incredibly good on him. I walked down the deck stairs and handed Jamal a glass of cider. "You need to save your energy," I teased, bumping his shoulder with mine. "You are on turkey carving duty in exactly 20 minutes. Jamal took a long drink of the cider and grinned, wiping his brow. "I am ready for it. I have been watching tutorial videos all morning. I am not about to mess up the first Thanksgiving dinner that actually tastes good and does not feature a side dish of emotional extortion." We shared a knowing, quiet smile. We both understood the profound weight of this holiday. For the first time in our entire lives, we were celebrating with people who actually wanted us in the room. The sliding glass doors opened again, and Brian stepped out onto the deck. My lead property manager had traded his razor-sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suits for a comfortable cashmere sweater and dark jeans. He was carrying a tray of freshly baked dinner rolls, followed closely by his wife Sarah and their 2 young daughters, who immediately ran off to join Leo and Sophie in the yard. Brian was no longer just the legal counsel who helped me execute the most satisfying eviction in county history. Over the past year, our professional mutual respect had blossomed into a genuine, steadfast friendship. He and his family were a core part of my inner circle. They were exactly the kind of people I wanted at my table, people of substance, integrity, and absolute loyalty. "We are ready. Whenever you are," Boss Brian announced, setting the tray down on the outdoor patio table. "Sarah just finished the glaze for the carrots, and the dining room is fully set. Then let us gather everyone together," I said, feeling a deep, radiant warmth settling into my chest. 10 minutes later, we were all seated around the massive, custom-built dining table that anchored the newly renovated room. The table was laden with an absolute feast. Crystal glasses sparkled under the modern chandelier, but there was no pretension here. There was no desperate need to impress anyone. There were only genuine smiles, relaxed postures, and the comfortable, continuous hum of people who truly loved each other's company. Jamal stood at the head of the table, wielding the carving knife with theatrical flair, making the kids erupt into fits of giggles. Brian and Sarah were sharing a story about their recent family vacation, their voices blending perfectly with the ambient music playing softly in the background. Leo and Sophie were practically vibrating with excitement, entirely secure in their home, entirely safe in their world. I sat at the opposite end of the table, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my wine. I looked around the room, letting the beautiful, vibrant reality of this moment wash over me completely. This was my chosen family. This was the empire I had built, not just in real estate and logistics, but in love, respect, and absolute peace. For 3 decades, Gloria and Thomas had tried to convince me that I was nothing. They had tried to condition me to believe that my worth was permanently tethered to their approval, and that without their toxic family structure, I would be entirely alone and destitute. They had called me a dropout. They had called me a broken, pathetic disappointment. I looked at the stunning, restored mahogany floors beneath my feet. I looked at my thriving, joyful children. I looked at the brilliant, loyal friends who sat at my table by choice, not by obligation. Success isn't about the cars you lease or the fake image you project. It's about having the power to protect your peace and the people you love. They called me a failure, but looking around at my life today, I've never felt more victorious. The narratives provided share a profound and painful truth. The people who are supposed to protect and value us the most are sometimes the ones who cause the deepest wounds. Whether it is a family secretly selling an inherited warehouse, abandoning a daughter facing brain surgery to visit an amusement park, or disowning a child in her darkest hour of job loss and marital betrayal, the core lesson remains strikingly consistent. We cannot control how others perceive our worth, but we possess absolute control over how we value ourselves. When stripped of external validation and familial support, we are forced to confront who we are without the labels and expectations imposed by toxic dynamics. Realizing that success defined by others is a moving target is ultimately a liberating experience. These stories teach us that hitting rock bottom can actually serve as a powerful, unshakable foundation. By setting firm boundaries, leaning on the chosen family who genuinely show up during crises, and trusting our own vision even when others see only a worthless endeavor, we can transform profound betrayal into an authentic triumph. The journey from feeling like a forgotten daughter to becoming the architect of your own life is grueling. Yet it reveals that true family isn't merely about shared DNA. It is built by those who sit by your hospital bed and celebrate your genuine self. Walking away from toxic environments isn't giving up. It is an act of profound courage and self-preservation. Take a moment today to evaluate the boundaries in your own life and boldly ask yourself if you are building your future on your own terms or conforming to someone else's expectations.